What's up, everyone? Quick favor before we start. If you like the stories, then please consider liking and subscribing to support the channel. If you're on mobile, then hit the hype feature. It massively boosts these stories to new listeners. Also, I'm curious where in the world you're tuning in from, so leave your location in the comments. All right, enough talk. Let's jump into tonight's tale. The coffee in the machine at Idaho Depot number 7 had probably been brewed sometime before Elias Vance had even started working there. He'd made peace with that 6 months ago. You poured it, you drank it, you didn't think too hard about the color. He set his thermos on the edge of the console and dropped into the primary chair. The monitoring station smelled like every monitoring station from his Army years. Stale air, warm plastic, fluorescence that had been running too long. The hum was constant. It was the sound of a room that never slept. 24 monitors, each showing a feed from somewhere on the facility, empty hallways in concrete gray, an empty motor pool, warehouses full of crates he wasn't cleared to know the contents of. The outer perimeter fence lit by sodium lights that gave everything a flat orange wash. The desert beyond, black and absolute. 6 months. He'd taken the job in April after cycling out of his Army contract and spending 2 months in Boise doing nothing he was proud of. GS-6 civilian security, night shift, remote facility, generous hazard differential. He'd assumed the differential was for the boredom. It usually was. He sat down and began the shift handoff log. Date, time, weather, clear, cold, 28 degrees. Facility status, nominal. He wrote it without looking at the monitors. He'd been doing this long enough that the feeds had become wallpaper. Except he wasn't alone tonight. He hadn't noticed Corbin right away, which said something about how still the man was sitting. The secondary chair, for a supervisor or trainee, never used in the 6 months Elias had been here, was occupied. Corbin Marks sat in it the way a coat hangs on a hook, hands folded, eyes fixed on one monitor. Not all of the monitors. Feed 7. "You're early," Corbin said without turning. "Good." Corbin. Elias set down his pen. "What are you doing here?" Corbin had been the one to train him 6 months ago. 4 days of handoffs, equipment walkthroughs, emergency contacts. 17 years on the night shift at this depot, and it showed in the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like a man who'd stopped being in a hurry long ago. Somewhere in his mid-50s, with the complexion of someone who spent most of his waking hours under fluorescent light. Tonight his eyes were worse than Elias remembered. The circles under them weren't just dark, they were sunken, grayish, the skin thin. His folded hands had a fine, continuous tremor. On the floor beside his chair was a water bottle, and the liquid inside wasn't water. "How long have you been here?" Elias asked. 18 hours. Corbin turned to look at him. His expression made Elias pull back slightly, not fear, but exhaustion past the point of emotion, like a man who had been very afraid for a very long time and had arrived somewhere on the other side of it. "Couldn't leave until you got here. Someone has to stay on the glass." "On the what?" "Feed 7. He turned back to the monitor. "You have to keep someone on feed 7. Elias looked at it. One of the older feeds, lower resolution, slightly washed out, prone to a faint rolling flicker at the top edge. A hallway inside the old radar building on the north end of the facility. Decommissioned decades ago. Concrete walls, a bare overhead fixture, double doors at the far end. Empty. "I've looked at that feed 100 times, Elias said. "There's nothing there." "Not right now." Corbin reached into his jacket and removed a laminated card, old enough that the edges were thick and yellowed. He held it without opening it. "Sit down, Vance. I need to go through some rules with you." "We did rules 6 months ago." "Not these rules." Elias sat. He'd learned in the Army that when a man who had been through something you hadn't used that particular tone, you sat and listened, even if you thought he was losing it. Corbin unfolded the card. The paper inside was dense with handwriting, Small, cramped, layered, multiple hands, like something added to over years by people who had all sat in the same chair. "The first rule," Corbin said. "When monitoring Feed 7, you never look away. Blinking is allowed, but only one eye at a time. You must always have at least one eye on the screen. This is called the staggered blink." He paused. "I'll show you." He demonstrated. It was a strange thing to watch, deliberately closing one eye while keeping the other open, then switching, a slow, alternating rhythm. Elias made himself watch until it stopped looking ridiculous. It took about a minute. After that, it had a mechanical quality, almost like a breathing exercise. If both eyes close at the same time, even for half a second, it advances one position. If both stay closed for more than 1 second, it reaches the glass. He tapped the monitor. "Practice it." Elias did. He felt slightly ridiculous sitting in a government monitoring station, alternating which eye was open, but he did it anyway. A few minutes in, it felt almost natural. "Rule 2, Corbin continued. "The white event. The screen goes to full white static. When that happens, you do not blink at all. The white lasts exactly 12 seconds. Count them. If you blink during it, the thing advances 3 positions. If you close both eyes during the white..." He stopped and breathed. "It reaches the glass immediately. Your eyes will burn. You'll want to rub them. Do not." He went through all 7 rules. He read each from the card, paused, explained. "Rule 3. During the white event, ignore every other monitor. The figures you see on them are copies, traps, lies, and the real one is always only on Feed 7. Rule 4. If you hear your name from the station speakers, don't respond, don't acknowledge, don't even change your breathing. Rule 5. The hourly radio check-in. The exact words to use and what to do if the dispatcher's voice sounds wrong, too slow, too flat, too eager. Rule 6. If the power flickers, do not move, do not turn around, no matter what you feel behind you. Rule 7. The 4:34 a.m. system reset. 7 seconds of total darkness, back turned to all monitors, hands pressed hard over ears, count to 7. When he was done, he held out the card. Elias took it. "Walk me through Rule 5, Corbin said. Elias read it off the card. "Radio checks every hour on the hour. Dispatcher says Depot 7, this is control, status. I say status nominal, Feed 7 holding. Exact words. If the voice sounds wrong, I use the same response. If they ask me to do anything, leave the station, check another feed, I say, unable, holding position. Why? Because the real dispatcher knows the rules, the imitation doesn't." Corbin nodded once. "Say the response. Status nominal, Feed 7 holding." Again. "Status nominal, Feed 7 holding." "Good." He looked at Feed 7. "You think I'm having a breakdown?" Elias considered being polite. "I think 17 years of nights in an isolated facility does things to a person." "Fair. I thought the same about the man who trained me." His voice stayed even. "Then one night the screen went white, and I counted 12 seconds with my eyes burning, and the thing was right there against the glass. After that, I stopped thinking he needed rest." "What is it?" "I know what it does better than what it is." He nodded at the card. "Those 7 rules cover everything I've seen it try. They'll keep you alive through a shift." The clock above the monitors read 1:52 a.m. Elias looked at the walls. He'd noticed the scratches before, at eye level along the section nearest the primary chair. He'd assumed they were incidental. Now he looked carefully. Tally marks in groups of 5, single lines with dates, names. The oldest were faded almost to nothing. The newest had pale, raw edges. "How many people have sat in this chair?" he asked. "The ones who followed the rules. About 40. Corbin stood slowly. joints stiff from the long sit. His eyes stayed on feed 7 even as he rose. The ones who didn't is a shorter list, but not because there were fewer. At 2 a.m. exactly, Corbin stopped. He looked at feed 7 one last time, with an expression Elias couldn't quite name. Not fear, not resignation, something closer to acknowledging a debt you've known about for years and are finally settling. "It has my name now," he said. "I can't stay." "What does that mean?" "It means what it means." He pocketed the water bottle and smoothed his collar with deliberate slowness. "Your turn, Vance." Corbin. Staggered blink on feed 7. Don't respond to the voices. Don't look away during the white event. 4:34. Back to the monitors. Hands over ears. Count to 7. He paused at the door. "You're more stubborn than I was. That'll serve you." He opened the door and walked out. Elias pulled up the hallway camera on monitor 4. Corbin walked away down the corridor, head slightly down. Elias watched him all the way to the exit vestibule. Corbin stopped at the outer door. Then he turned. The vestibule camera sat in the upper corner, angled down. It showed Corbin standing at the push bar, except instead of going through, he'd turned to face the lens directly. His lips were moving. Elias turned up the audio and got nothing but system hiss. He watched Corbin's mouth anyway, and with the specific discomfort of a man who doesn't want to know but can't stop himself. He read it, his own name, over and over. Corbin pushed through the door and walked outside. The northern exterior camera showed him walking north, not toward the parking lot, not toward the road, into the desert, into the dark, his figure shrinking in the frame until the sodium lights no longer reached him, and the camera showed only flat ground and silver sagebrush, and nothing. Elias sat with that for a while. Then he turned back to feed 7. The empty hallway, the concrete walls, the double doors. He began the staggered blink. The next 45 minutes were the longest in recent memory. Nothing happened on any of the 24 feeds. He ran his sweeps, quick looks at the other cameras, eyes back to feed 7. Empty facility, orange-lit perimeter, black desert. Nothing. He thought about the names on the wall. At 2:47 a.m., feed 7 flickered. A single roll of distortion, top to bottom. The kind old CRTs make with signal interference. He'd seen it happen on this feed before. He'd always assumed it was the equipment's age. The picture steadied. In the hallway, the empty hallway that had been empty for 6 months, there was a figure. Standing near the far wall, 2/3 of the way down the corridor. It hadn't been there a second ago. Not a second ago, not 10 minutes ago, not in 6 months of shift work. It was there now. The shape was roughly human. Roughly, because the edges weren't right. They moved even in stillness, a slow rolling quality like static on a dead channel given a body and made to stand upright. No features resolved, just a shape of constant gray-white noise facing the camera. Elias did not blink. He began the staggered blink, left eye, then right. His hands were tight on the armrests. The figure didn't move. It stood in the static and faced the camera with the stillness of something that doesn't need to move because it already has your full attention and it knows it. The clock read 2:51 a.m. The radio crackled. "Depot 7, this is Control. Status." He reached for the mic without looking away from feed 7, left eye open, right briefly closed while his hand found the button. "Status nominal. Feed 7 holding." A pause. The normal kind. Someone on the other end noting it down, finishing their coffee, existing in their own warm and ordinary night somewhere that wasn't this. "Copy. Next check at 3 o'clock. Elias let out a slow breath. He kept his eyes on feed 7. The figure hadn't moved. He had followed the rules. He had said the right words. For one fragile moment, he felt something close to competence, the specific, grounded feeling of doing a thing correctly when it counted. He hadn't had that feeling reliably in a while. Then the station speakers crackled. Not the radio. The wall-mounted speakers for internal facility announcements, the ones that hadn't broadcast anything in all 6 months he'd worked here. A voice came from them, thin, trembling at its edges in a way human voices don't tremble. It had the quality of something heard through a wall or across a distance not measured entirely in feet. Eli, as Corbin's voice. Every specific quality of it, the register, the roughness in the lower range, the way he'd said Elias's name, it was begging. Elias's hand went tight on the armrest. He kept his eyes on feed 7. He did not respond. The figure in the hallway hadn't moved. It stood in the static and watched the camera and waited with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time and had learned through all that time that patience was its best tool. Outside, the exterior camera showed flat ground and sagebrush. Corbin Marks was nowhere visible. The desert was dark and still. Elias sat alone in the monitoring station and did the staggered blink, one eye and then the other, and said nothing. The voice didn't come again, but it felt closer than the speakers should have made it. The whisper from the speakers didn't come back. That was almost worse. Elias sat with his eyes on feed 7 and listened to the station settle around him. The cooling fans, the low hum of the fluorescents, the faint tick of the CRT banks. The figure in the hallway of the old radar building hadn't moved. 2/3 down the corridor, facing the camera, made of slow rolling static that shifted even when the rest of it was still. He did the staggered blink, left, then right. The clock read 3:04 a.m., 1 hour since Corbin had walked into the desert. The exterior northern camera showed nothing, flat ground, pale sagebrush, the sodium lights ending where the dark began. The problem with the staggered blink was that it required just enough concentration to be exhausting and not quite enough to keep his mind engaged. It was like keeping one finger tapping on a table, simple enough that his brain stopped treating it as a task, which meant his thoughts started wandering, which meant he kept having to haul them back. He'd been awake since 6 the previous morning, and he was running on bad coffee and whatever nervous energy the last hour had produced. He needed something to do with his hands. The file cabinets were against the wall to his left, within arm's reach. He'd always assumed they held supply logs and maintenance records. He'd never opened them. He did now. First drawer, supplies. Second, equipment logs back to 1994. Third drawer, bottom, heavier than the others. He pulled it open and found the logbooks. Standard government issue. Green cloth covers, black binding, the kind from a federal supply catalog. 11 of them. He stacked them on the console beside his thermos, keeping feed 7 in his periphery, the staggered blink going without fully thinking about it. The earliest was dated 1971. Same handwriting throughout. Neat, small, consistent. One person, every entry, for what looked like a decade. Date, time in, time out. Camera status, notable events. Most said, no notable events. But not all. About 40 pages in, the first anomalous entry. March 1974. Feed 7. Figure present. Staggered blink maintained. White event at 0312. Duration 12 seconds. No breach. Figure returned to position 1. Hands steady. He turned pages. More entries. Weeks of nothing, then another. Voice through speakers. Did not respond. And later, figure at position 3 after simultaneous blink. My fault. Recovered. Remainder of shift nominal. The handwriting changed in 1983. New guard. Same format. A little more personal. Every few months, a note on a position advance or a close call. One entry that just said, bad night and nothing after it. Then one stopped him. June 1989. In the neat small hand from 1971. Whoever it was had come back, or never fully left. Figure reached position 9. Closest yet. He was against the glass. I could see his face. He doesn't have one. He's looking for one. Added later in different ink. Do not read this entry to anyone new. They will not sleep. Just tell them the rules. The last entry in that handwriting was from 1991. 3 words. It has... That was it. Mid-sentence. The pen had dragged at the dash, like it had been set down quickly. The rest of the page was blank. He set that logbook down, picked up the next. A new hand. A guard starting in 1992, picking up from where the last one had apparently stopped being able to continue. His first entry: I was told not to ask what happened to the previous guard. I was told the rules. I am writing them down here in case I need to check them. And then all 7 rules, written from memory, every detail correct. He pulled his chair slightly left and opened the computer terminal. Mid-90s government issue, beige tower, credentials taped to the underside of the keyboard. He logged in and went to the personnel folder. Corbin Marks, active. Night security, monitoring station. Start date 2007. No flag, no notation. Nothing to indicate he'd walked into the Idaho desert 3 hours ago. He found the subfolder labeled Historical Personnel. William Sellers, Night Security. Start date 1981. End date blank. He opened the file. A scanned photograph. A man in his late 40s, dark circles, a stillness in his expression that Elias recognized now as something specific rather than photographic flatness. The notes were standard until the last one, dated 11 years ago. Guard Sellers did not report for shift relief. Exit camera confirms subject departed north perimeter on foot at 0431. No personnel recovery conducted per standing protocol. No recovery per standing protocol. He thought about Corbin walking north. He thought about the 1991 log entry ending mid-sentence. The names on the wall, the tally marks. Corbin hadn't done something unique. He'd done something old. It has my name. Going outside. Don't follow. Sellers, 11 years ago. It has my name now. I can't stay. Corbin, 3 hours ago. He went back to the archive. Found a folder labeled Technical Archive. Scanned documents, pages slightly skewed. He opened the oldest one. Header, Department of Defense, eyes only. Below it, Project Lucid Lens. Status update, October 1957. Most of it was redacted. Long black bars, but the unredacted fragments were enough. The project had used the radar array in the north building, the old radar building whose hallway was currently occupied. The array had broadcast focused electromagnetic pulses over the horizon. The 1957 test had been a success, then a section probably missed by the redactor because they hadn't understood what they were reading. Array successfully illuminated target area. During broadcast, array contacted frequency outside intended operational parameters. Post-test monitoring of closed-circuit output indicates presence of unidentified signal artifact. Artifact exhibits behavior inconsistent with equipment malfunction. Recommend extended monitoring. Recommend extended monitoring. He scrolled to the attached image. Black and white photograph, slightly overexposed. 2 men in lab coats in front of the radar array. One had been scratched out, not digitally but physically, the original defaced before scanning. Just a void where a face should have been. The second man was smiling, hands in his pockets. Beneath the photograph, in blue pen, added long after filing. He looked away. Elias looked at feed 7. The figure was still there. He was doing the staggered blink without thinking about it now. Left, right, almost automatic. He understood what the names on the wall were. They weren't decoration. They were the source material for every rule on the laminated card in his pocket. At 3:44 a.m., the monitors on his left flickered. Not feed 7. The feeds beside and below it. East warehouse, motor pool, secondary hallway. 1 roll of distortion across each. Then they steadied. And in each of them, a figure. Same shape. Same slow rolling static at the edges. 1 in the warehouse doorway. 1 at the far end of the motor pool. 1 in the secondary hallway. almost the same position as the Feed 7 figure in its own corridor. All facing their cameras, all still. His eyes wanted to move. The reflex was strong. 3 figures had appeared 6 inches from where he was looking, and every part of him said to check them. He kept his eyes on Feed 7. Rule 3. The others are mirrors, reflections, lies. The real one is only on Feed 7. He held Feed 7 in direct vision and kept the peripheral figures in the corners of his sight, 3 shapes of static in their frames, and he kept the staggered blink going and did not turn his head. In his periphery, they didn't move. They just waited for him to make a mistake. At 3:46 a.m., the speakers clicked, the relay engaging. "Elias," a woman's voice, soft, trembling slightly. "Elias, it's Mom. I'm scared, sweetheart. I don't know where I am." It was perfect. The way she said his name, the emphasis on the first syllable, the word sweetheart that she only used when she was genuinely frightened and not just fretting. He had not called her in 8 months. He still didn't know what to say about the discharge. His eyes were hot. He did not respond. The voice changed. "Vance," flat and clipped, the voice of a man who had never softened a vowel in his professional life. "You froze up again. Same as always. You know what that makes you?" A pause designed to land. "The problem." Sergeant Kowalczyk. Exact inflection. The precise cruelty of it, always aimed at whatever you were least certain about. Elias's jaw was tight enough to ache. He did not respond. The voice changed again. "Eli." Quieter. Rougher. "It's Corbin. I'm in the radar room. I can see the camera light. That means you can see me. Just look at me for 1 second. Just one." There was no microphone in the radar room. There had never been a microphone in the radar room. Feed 7 was a one-way feed. "Please," the voice said. "Just look at me." He did not look. He did not speak. He kept the staggered blink until the speakers went quiet. The clock read 3:47. At 3:48 a.m., Feed 7 went white. Not a flicker. All at once. Instant. Total. The concrete hallway was gone, replaced by pure white static, bright enough to light the room. He did not blink. He forced his eyes wide. The white was physical, like it had weight against his corneas. His eyes watered within 3 seconds. He let them water. 1, 2, 3. Tears ran freely. His vision blurred at the edges. The center of Feed 7 was still white, and he kept his gaze there. 4, 5, 6. The room dropped in temperature, not gradually. Sudden, like a door opening onto something that wasn't outside air. 7, 8, 9. Something pressed against the glass. Not Feed 7 specifically, all of them. He couldn't look to confirm it, but he felt it. A change in the quality of the room. A presence the white was holding at the surface of every screen at once. 10, 11. The burn was deep. Tears dripped off his chin. He did not close his eyes. 12. The white cut off. All of it, all at once. Elias blinked. One involuntary blink. Both eyes. The reflex too strong after 12 seconds. He felt it happen and looked immediately at Feed 7, left eye open before the right had finished closing. The figure was not 2/3 down the corridor. It was at the end, directly in front of the camera. Its hand was pressed flat against the lens, the static around it churning like water around a stone. Through the tears and the low resolution, he could see the vague suggestion of a face. Not features, just the impression of something pressing closer, trying to see through. And on every other monitor, all 23, the same thing. The same hand against the glass. The same face pressing from every angle, every camera, every screen in the room simultaneously. Elias sat very still. He began the staggered blink. His hands were shaking. He hadn't noticed until now. The same fine tremor he'd seen in Corbin's hands. He understood now that it wasn't exhaustion. It was the specific vibration of a person holding themselves completely still when everything in them wants to move. He kept his eyes on feed 7. The face against the glass did not move. It pressed, and it waited. So did he. The face against the glass didn't move for 11 minutes. Elias watched the clock between blinks, one eye on feed 7 and one eye on the minute hand. The figure was pressed against the camera lens, its static hand flat on the glass, the suggestion of a face pushing forward like it was trying to see through frosted plastic. The other 23 monitors still showed the same face from every angle, a ring of pressing, watching gray-white noise surrounding him from all sides at once. He kept the staggered blink. Left, right, left, right. At 3:59 a.m., the peripheral monitors dropped back to normal one by one. Empty warehouse, empty motor pool, empty hallways. Feed 7 went last. The hand withdrew from the lens. The face receded. The figure stepped back down the corridor to the far end, back near the double doors, back to where it had first appeared. Watching, patient, still, like it had only been checking something and was satisfied. Elias let out a slow breath. His eyes were still raw from the white event, the skin below his cheekbones tight where the tears had dried. He kept the staggered blink. The clock turned to 4 a.m. He reached for the radio. The hourly check-in was as routine as anything in his life had ever been. 12 times a shift, 6 shifts a week, 6 months running. Pick up the handset, wait for the carrier tone, respond to dispatch. He'd stopped thinking about it after the first week. He thought about it now. He keyed the mic and got static, not the brief hiss before a connection cleared. This was thicker, longer, the kind that seemed to push back against the signal rather than just fill the absence of one. Then a voice came through. "Copy." A pause that was too long. "L-E-S." Another pause. "All feeds nom inal." It was a woman's voice. The right register, the right general shape, but wrong in ways that were hard to pin down precisely. Too slow, like a recording played at 3/4 speed. The spaces between syllables stretched just past where they should have ended. Too flat. The real dispatcher had a professional neutrality, the kind that came from doing the same job well for a long time. This was a different kind of flat. It was the flat of something that had learned what the words sounded like but hadn't learned why people said them. Elias looked at feed 7, figure at the far end. Still, he responded with the exact words. "Status nominal. Feed 7 holding." Silence. 6 seconds. Then the voice again. Same stretched cadence. "Depot 7. Proceed to radar building. Check. Feed source." The cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Rule 5. If the dispatcher asks you to do something, you refuse. He keyed the mic. "Unable. Holding position." Longer silence. Then the voice came back, and this time it was slightly different. Closer, like the distance between speaker and microphone had halved. "That was the correct answer." The transmission cut off. The carrier tone returned, normal. Elias set the handset down. His fingers were cold. Feed 7 was holding. Figure at the far end, same position. He checked the clock. 4:03 a.m. 31 minutes to the reset. He knew Rule 7 by memory now. At 4:34, the system performed a hard reset. All feeds dark, 7 seconds. Back turned to the monitors, hands over ears, count to 7. He'd read it on the card. He'd heard Corbin say it. He'd understood it as a fact, in the same way you understand that a fire exit exists before you've ever needed to use one. Understanding a fact and knowing what it would feel like were two different things. Knowing what it would feel like to stand in a completely dark room with your back to dead screens and your hands pressed over your ears while something behind you wanted you to turn around. That was a different kind of knowing, and he was 31 minutes away from it. He rehearsed it anyway. Stand, turn, hands over ears, count to 7, don't look, don't listen, don't believe the voices. At 4:12 a.m., the lights flickered. One stutter, fluorescence dimming and staying dim. The cooling fans in the walls dropped in pitch. The monitors dimmed simultaneously, the CRT images going slightly soft. Elias did not move. He kept his eyes on feed 7 and his hands on the armrests. The temperature dropped. He felt it on his forearms first, then the back of his hands, then his neck. Not a gradual cool, more like stepping from a heated room into an unheated one, except nothing around him had changed. The cold was in the room with him now. Feed 7 showed the figure still at the far end, same position, but it felt like it was paying a different kind of attention, less like it was watching the camera and more like it was watching the room on the other side. He kept the staggered blink, left, right, cold breath on the back of his neck, very precise. The exact sensation of someone standing close behind you and exhaling. The slight directional quality, the specific location at the top of the spine where neck meets skull. He felt each part of it, and every part of him wanted to turn. He did not turn. He fixed his eyes on the center of feed 7 and kept the staggered blink and breathed at the same rate he had been breathing all hour. Something traced down his spine. A light touch, starting between his shoulder blades and moving downward, slow and deliberate, like a finger drawing a line down the center of his back. No warmth to it. It had the temperature of the cold that was already in the room. He stared at feed 7. Left eye, right eye. The touch stopped at the small of his back. Then the hands came, both at once, settling onto his shoulders from behind, not grabbing but pressing, the weight and shape of 2 hands, each finger individually felt, palms flat against the tops of his shoulders. The cold went through his shirt and into the muscle beneath. His jaw clamped shut. His vision blurred at the edges from the adrenaline and he blinked, one eye, then the other, and kept his gaze on feed 7 and did not move. The hands gripped harder. He thought about the 1989 log entry. He doesn't have one. He's looking for one. He thought about Corbin saying, "You're more stubborn than I was. That'll serve you." He held those things like ballast, and he did not move. The grip tightened once more, and then the lights came back to full, all at once. Fluorescence restoring, fans resuming pitch, monitors brightening. The hands were gone. The cold was gone. The room was the same room it had been all night. Warm plastic smell, CRT hum, the ticking of cooling fans. Feed 7 showed the figure at the far end, patient as ever. Elias sat in the primary chair and let his heartbeat come down and did not turn around to check if anything was behind him. He knew nothing would be. That was the point of the touch, not to be there when he checked, but to make him check. The checking was the mechanism. The checking was what it wanted. He didn't check. At 4:17 a.m., the speakers crackled. Not a voice this time. His own voice. Status nominal. Feed 7 holding. His exact words from the 4 a.m. transmission, played back at full volume. Perfect fidelity. Then again. Then faster. Then slower. The phrase losing its shape. The words breaking down into syllables. Status. Nom. Inal. And then into something that wasn't quite syllables anymore. His voice doing things his voice had never done. He kept his eyes on feed 7. He did not respond. Responding was acknowledging. Acknowledging was the same as looking away. The playback stopped. The 4 monitors in the center bank flickered, going dark for 1 second and coming back with new images. His apartment. He recognized it before he could choose not to. His couch, his television, the window with the half-closed blinds. The angle was from the foot of his bed, except there was no camera at the foot of his bed. He could read the clock on his nightstand. 3:47 p.m. yesterday afternoon, before he'd left for his shift. In the corner of the bedroom, between the closet door and the wall, something stood. Same shape, same rolling static at the edges, standing in the corner of his bedroom in footage from yesterday afternoon, facing the bed. It raised one hand and waved, slow and deliberate, the way you wave at someone across a distance. Elias filed it. His apartment had a television, older model, built-in tuner, a receiver. The entity lived in broadcast signals and closed-circuit feeds. He filed that thought in the part of his mind that would need to deal with it later, not tonight, not right now, and kept his eyes on feed 7 and did not respond to the wave. The 4 monitors went back to their normal feeds. The speakers went quiet. The clock read 4:22 a.m., 12 minutes to the reset. He focused on his breathing, even and slow, the technique from comms training for keeping steady during operations. He watched feed 7 and counted minutes. At 4:25, the figure at the far end shifted, a small lateral move, 2 or 3 feet left, then back, like it was restless, like it had been standing still for a very long time and was starting to lose patience. At 4:28, it moved forward. 1 clear step, then stopped. He checked himself. Had he double blinked without catching it? He didn't think so, but this deep in the night, after everything his eyes had been through, he couldn't be fully certain. He filed it and kept watching. 4:29, another step forward. Then at 4:30, 2 more in quick succession, each one timed precisely to the alternation of the staggered blink. It was finding the gaps. It had been watching him blink for hours, and it was learning to move inside the microfraction between one eye closing and the other opening. He tightened the blink. Faster alternation, less time between. The figure advanced again anyway, midway down the corridor now, moving faster in the last 4 minutes than in the previous 2 hours, like something that had been conserving itself all night and was finally spending. The clock read 4:32, 2 minutes. He ran through Rule 7 one last time. Stand. Turn your back to the monitors, hands over ears. Count to 7. Don't look. Don't listen. Don't believe the voices, whoever they sound like. At 4:33, it stopped conserving entirely. It moved without waiting for blink gaps. The static form stretched and distorted as the speed increased, arms too long, the head wrong, the edges bleeding outward into interference patterns that crawled from feed 7 onto the adjacent monitors. He was watching it run down the corridor, and the staggered blink was doing nothing because it wasn't waiting for the gaps anymore. It was just coming. His eyes burned from keeping them open. He kept them open. The figure filled more of the frame with every second, the corridor shrinking behind it, the double doors at the far end disappearing into the static that surrounded it. At 4:33:55, it reached out one arm toward the camera, the fingers of a hand made entirely of rolling interference extending toward the lens. The tips touched the glass of the camera housing, and the feed 7 image lurched. A burst of distortion, the image rolling and stabilizing and rolling again. He did not close his eyes. 4:33. Every screen in the room went black. All 24, simultaneously, cutting to absolute black. The fluorescent lights cut out at the same instant. The cooling fans spun down. The hum that had been the constant background of the entire night dropped into a silence so complete he could hear his own blood. Dark, completely dark. Behind him, something breathed, slow and deliberate, in the space behind the chair, close enough that if he turned, he would have been facing it within arm's reach. He did not turn. Then, from a place that felt less like behind him and more like inside his own head, in his own voice, his exact voice, the one it had been practicing from his radio transmissions all night. "You have to look now. The reset is starting. You have to check." Elias stood up from the chair. He turned away from where the voice had come from, which meant he turned to face the dead monitors, and then he stepped back so his back was to the screens. He raised both hands and pressed them hard against his ears, palms flat, Fingers spread, pressing until all he could hear was the pressure of his own hands and the blood moving in his head and nothing else. He began counting. 1, 1. The room was completely dark, not dim, dark in the way that only exists when every light source is removed at once, when your eyes search for something to adjust to and find nothing. The only exception was the emergency exit sign above the door, a faint red-green glow too weak to illuminate anything except itself. It told him where the door was and nothing else. He kept his hands pressed hard against his ears. Palms flat, fingers spread, pressing until the room went from dark and quiet to dark and internal. Just the pressure, just the blood moving in his head, just the count. 2. He was standing with his back to the monitors. He could feel them behind him the way you feel a wall in the dark. Not touching it, just knowing it was there. 24 dead screens. The cooling fans had stopped with the power, and the absence of their hum was its own sound. The sound of a room that had been running for decades suddenly holding still. And somewhere in the space between the screens and the room, or between the room and something else entirely, the thing that had been pressing its hand against the camera lens 2 minutes ago. He counted. 3. The scream came from inside his head. Not from behind him, not from the speakers, which were as dead as everything else. It came from inside. His mother's voice at full volume, shrieking his name the way she had screamed it when he was 8 years old and had fallen off the garage roof and she came running from the back garden. That specific pitch, that specific terror. The kind of sound that doesn't fade in memory, because memory doesn't file it the same way it files ordinary things. It lasted 2 full seconds and then cut off completely. He kept his eyes squeezed shut. He kept his hands over his ears. 4. The hands came, both shoulders at once, hard, not the pressing weight from the power flicker, but grabbing, the fingers digging in, and they spun him. He felt his feet pivot on the concrete floor, felt the momentum of being turned against his will, and then he was facing a different direction from the one he'd chosen, and something was directly in front of him. He couldn't see it. His eyes were shut, but he could feel it, the cold of a presence that occupied space without having a body, and most of all the breathing on his face. Close, less than a foot, something exhaling from a place that had no lungs. He kept his eyes shut. He kept his hands pressed hard against his ears even as the arms held him in place. He had not stopped counting. 5. The hands were still on his shoulders. The breathing was still on his face. And then from the same place the scream had come from, not the room, not the speakers, but somewhere inside the space behind his eyes. A voice. Corbin's voice. Quiet, tired, kind in the specific way that only Corbin had ever been kind, with the warmth of someone who has been through something terrible and is trying to make it easier for the person after them. It's over, Eli. You can look now. The reset worked. You're safe. He felt his eyes twitch, the muscles around them pulling toward open. His whole body wanted to believe it. He was tired in a way that went well past physical. Tired the way you get when you have been frightened without relief for too long, and the voice was offering the relief, and it sounded exactly like Corbin, and it was kind. He thought about the laminated card in his breast pocket. If someone whispers, "It's over, you can look now," do not believe it. The rule had named this exact moment. Whoever wrote it had been standing in this exact spot, in the dark, hearing this exact offer, feeling this exact pull, and had written it down so that the person who came after would know. Not a general warning. A specific one. Because the moment was specific. Because it had happened before. Because it would happen again. He did not open his eyes. 6. The voice came again, softer. A murmur. Eli, I'm right here. It's done. He thought about the wall, the names scratched into it at eye level, the tally marks in groups of 5, the dates going back 50 years. He thought about the 1991 log entry that ended mid-sentence. It has, and the blank pages after. He thought about William Sellers walking north into the desert. He thought about Corbin standing at the vestibule camera at 2 o'clock in the morning, mouthing his own name over and over like a man trying to hold on to something that was already leaving. He thought about what it would mean to open his eyes right now. The crossing. Not to kill, but to swap. Pulling him into the static loop and sending something else back out in his shape. Something that would know exactly how to behave, because it had been watching him blink and breathe and respond to the radio all night. He did not open his eyes. The hands on his shoulders loosened. The cold breathing pulled back from his face by a degree, then another. 7. He opened his eyes. The lights were on. Not all at once. They came up the way fluorescents do after a power cut. A brief flicker and then steady. The cooling fans started in the walls, building from nothing to their normal pitch in about 3 seconds. The monitors flickered to life one by one, the CRT images resolving from black to gray to the regular feeds. The warm plastic smell of the room came back, and the ticking of the equipment, and the specific quality of a space that had been dark and was lit again. Elias stood and turned around slowly. He checked feed 7 first. The hallway of the old radar building. Concrete walls, bare overhead fixture, double doors at the far end, closed, exactly as they had been all night. Empty. He looked at every other feed. East warehouse, empty. Motor pool, empty. Secondary hallways, empty. Perimeter fence lit by sodium lights, the desert flat and dark beyond. All of them normal. All of them showing exactly what they should have been showing at 4:34 in the morning at an unmanned depot in the Idaho desert. No figure. Not on feed 7. Not on any of them. He sat down in the primary chair. His legs gave out more than he sat. He went into the chair with the loss of coordination that follows holding yourself together for a very long time, and once he was in it, he stayed there. His hands were shaking, not the fine tremor from earlier in the night, but a larger shake, going through his whole hand and wrist. He let them shake. He watched feed 7. The hallway stayed empty. He laughed. It came out wrong. Too high, too short, and immediately turned into something that wasn't laughing. Something that involved pressing the back of his hand against his mouth for a few seconds while his chest worked through it. He let it happen. He kept his eyes on feed 7, still empty. At 4:40, he straightened in the chair and wiped his face with the back of his wrist. He did a full sweep of all 24 feeds, slow and thorough, the way he'd been trained in his first week before routine had made it casual. East warehouse, west warehouse, motor pool, maintenance building, 3 perimeter fences, 12 interior hallways, all empty, all ordinary. Feed 7, empty, still. He sat with it until 5 o'clock. At 5 a.m., the radio crackled. "Depot 7, this is Control. Status?" He recognized it immediately, not because the voice was distinctive, but because it was right. The cadence was right. The timing between words was right. The mild boredom of it was right. It was the voice of a person doing a routine job at 5 in the morning, not the voice of something learning what routine sounded like from the outside. He keyed the mic. His voice came out hoarse. "Status nominal. Feed 7 holding. Copy. Depot 7. Any incidents?" He looked at feed 7, the empty hallway, the double doors at the far end. "Negative. No incidents. Shift relief at 6 o'clock. Good morning, Depot 7. "Good morning." He set the handset down and sat in the silence for a moment. Then he reached into his breast pocket and took out the laminated card. He read all 7 rules again from the beginning, the way he read equipment logs, looking for anything he might have missed, any detail that would matter more next time. He found the line at the bottom of Rule 7. If it is still there, staring at you, you begin the staggered blink again and wait for the next reset at 4:34 tomorrow morning. There is no other way out. He read it twice. Then he put the card back in his pocket. At 5:47, he found a blank logbook in the file cabinet, brought it to the console, and wrote his entry. Date, name, start time. Then, feed 7, figure present 0247, staggered blink maintained throughout. White event 0348, 12 seconds, no breach. Rule 5, test 0400, protocol maintained. Rule 6, test 0412, physical contact, position held. Figure advanced significantly 0428 to 0432. Reset 0434. Feed 7 clear post-reset. No breach. He looked at it, then added one line. Staggered blink until relieved. He closed the logbook and put it with the others. At 6 a.m., the door opened. A young guard came in, early 20s, clean uniform, the slightly self-conscious walk of someone new to a job they hadn't yet settled into. He stopped when he saw Elias in the primary chair. "Hey, I'm here for the shift change." Elias stood. He picked up his thermos and the laminated card from the console. He looked at the guard, clean uniform, no dark circles, looking at the monitors with mild curiosity. His eyes moved across the feeds in a casual sweep. They passed over feed 7 without stopping. Elias walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned back. The guard was settling into the primary chair, looking at the bank of monitors with a faint frown. His eyes moved across the feeds again. "Feed 7 flickers sometimes," Elias said. "Don't ignore it." The guard looked up with the particular expression of someone receiving advice they've decided is outdated. "Sure, man. Get some sleep." Elias looked at feed 7 one more time. Empty hallway, concrete walls, double doors at the far end, closed. He walked out. Weeks later, he took his leave. He called his mother. A short, awkward call, the kind that happens when something has changed in you and you can't explain what, and said nothing about Idaho. He went to the grocery store. He cooked meals and ate them. He slept when he could, which was not as often as he wanted. He left the television unplugged for the first 2 weeks. Then he plugged it back in because he was tired of the silence being a daily decision rather than just a fact. He turned it on low and sat on his couch. The screen flickered. Just once. Not a 12-second white event. Just the brief static of an aging tuner dropping and regaining a signal. The picture came back immediately, but in that 1 second of gray-white noise, he had seen the impression of a hallway, a bare overhead light, a figure at the far end, not moving, facing outward, waiting. Then it was gone. The picture was back. The television was just a television. Elias looked at the remote on the arm of the couch. He could turn it off. He could unplug it again. He could put it in a closet, or move somewhere with no screens, or try to explain Idaho to someone and watch their face while they decided he needed rest. He put the remote down. He settled back into the couch. He looked at the screen. He began the staggered blink. Left eye, then right. Some rules don't end when the shift does. He understood that now, the way Corbin had probably understood it for 17 years, the way Sellers had understood it before that, the way it ran back through every name on the wall to whoever had first sat in that chair and learned what it cost to look away. Somewhere in the Idaho desert, a young guard was in the primary chair right now. Elias hoped someone had explained feed 7 to him. He hoped someone had made him practice the staggered blink until it was automatic. But he knew how these things went. The static man had been in that closed circuit since 1957. It had learned every guard who came before. It was still learning. It watched you blink. It counted your breaths. It practiced your voice until it had every inflection right. And it was patient in the way that only something with no concept of time can be patient. Not waiting, exactly. Just existing inside the gaps between signals. Watching. Pressing a little closer each time the eyes closed. Eventually, Someone would blink with both eyes at the wrong moment. Someone would hear a familiar voice and answer before they remembered the rule. Not tonight, maybe not for years, but eventually. The rules only worked for as long as the person following them stayed awake and careful and willing to hold position when every part of them said to run. Elias kept his eyes on the television. Left eye, then right. Left eye, then right. I took this job because I was running. That's the honest version. The version I told myself at the time was cleaner. I needed money. The pay was good. The location was remote. All of that was true. But the deeper truth was that I needed to disappear. And the North Atlantic is about as disappeared as a man can get without dying. 120 miles of open ocean between me and the coast. No paper trail. No last name on the crew manifest that matched anything tied to Marcus Anthony Shepard. I went by Mark Cole on the Ethelred. I'd been Mark Cole for 8 months. The flight out was 2 hours. I spent most of it watching the sea. It went from green to gray about 40 minutes out and then stayed gray. That flat, dead gray the North Atlantic does in October. The kind that makes you feel like you're looking at the world after it's given up. The other passengers were crew rotations. 6 men, 2 women, nobody talking. Everyone had the same settled look, like they'd made a decision a long time ago and stopped questioning it. The rig appeared 15 minutes before we landed. A smear of industrial gray growing slowly into something with angles and height and mass. I'd worked offshore rigs before and knew the scale, but this one sat differently on the water. The platforms I'd worked were busy things, flares burning, cranes moving, constant industrial noise. The Ethelred was still, too still. No flare at the stack. The derrick was present, but not turning. We circled once before landing, and I watched the deck. There were people, but they moved slowly and didn't gather in groups, and no one looked up at the helicopter coming in. One of the crew rotations, a broad man with a red beard who hadn't spoken the entire flight, stood when the rotors wound down and looked at me across the aisle. First time? First time here, not first time offshore. He nodded like that distinction didn't matter as much as I thought. Follow the rules, he said. That's the whole job. Not advice. Something memorized. Captain Jonas Voss met me on the helideck. Late 50s, Norwegian, built like a former boxer gone soft. Gray beard, permanent squint. Oilskin jacket in weather that didn't require one, weight slightly favoring his right leg. He didn't offer a hand. You're the new diver. Mark Cole. I know, follow me. He walked me through the rig for almost an hour. Methodical, crew quarters, mess hall, control room, equipment bays, the dive station below the main platform. Short sentences. This is your bunk. This is where you eat. This is the saturation chamber. This is the bell. No elaboration, no questions about my background. What I thought of the place was that it was wrong in a way I couldn't name. Not dirty, well maintained actually, but the atmosphere sat differently. In saturation diving, you develop a sensitivity to pressure that never fully goes away. Your body learns to read it. On the Ethelred, something was registering just below the threshold of any formal reading, present from the moment I stepped off the helicopter. At my cabin door, Voss handed me a laminated binder, about 30 pages. Read it tonight. Memorize it. These aren't suggestions. What happens if I don't follow them? "You go in the water," he said. "Not as a diver." Flat, probable outcome. Then he walked off without looking back. I sat on the bunk and read the binder twice. 8 rules, laminated, a few annotated by previous hands in ink I didn't recognize. I got out my pen and started adding my own notes in the margins. The mess hall was half full for dinner. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Veteran crew were easy to identify by their stillness. The newer hands ate faster and kept their eyes moving. "You get used to it," said a voice across from me. Cropped blonde hair, lean, faint old scars on both forearms, pale with age. "Sana Ekdahl, lead diver." "Mark Cole," she already knew. "Saturation experience?" 12 years Navy, 3 more commercial. About 400 hours below 200 meters. "This is different from Navy diving," she said. "Not information. Something settled. Down there, you're never alone. Even when your instruments say you are. Especially then." I waited for her to explain. She didn't. Briefing at 0700. Coffee finished, she left. I sat with my stew getting cold. I was a technical diver, instruments and procedure. I was going to have to adjust my thinking here. I was on deck at 2340 because I couldn't sleep. Rule 1 was sitting in my head. At 2347, the rig goes silent for exactly 11 minutes. I wanted to see what it actually looked like. The deck was cold. I stood at the railing and watched the water. Black. Properly black. Not the deep blue black of a moonlit ocean, but a flat absence that started at the waterline and went down without limit. The rig's running lights caught the surface close in. 10 feet out, the ocean stopped existing visually. At 2347, the generators wound down. Not slowly, all at once. The vibration I'd felt in my boots since stepping off the helicopter disappeared. Without it, the silence was enormous. I'd been in deep silence before. This was different. Not the silence of insulation, the silence of everything deciding to hold its breath. The wind had dropped. The sea stopped slapping the hull. Even the cold felt quieter. I stopped moving. My hands tightened on the railing. The water below was blacker than it had been 60 seconds ago. I know how that sounds. I'm being precise anyway. The quality of the dark had changed. It had depth and texture and the specific quality of being watched by something that doesn't need light to see. I held my breath without deciding to. The pressure came first, not in my ears, behind them, in the bone behind the ear, the way depth pressure feels when your equalization isn't keeping up. I hadn't been underwater. I was standing on deck, at sea level. The pressure had no business being there. And yet there it was, building slowly. I gripped the railing. At 2358, the generators came back on. The vibration returned to my boots. The water below went back to being just dark water. I exhaled. First real breath in several minutes. I looked at my hands. The skin across both palms had torn, shallow but bleeding. 11 minutes without noticing. My hands had the evidence. I went inside, washed them, lay down with the lights on. Something was down there. I'd known it from the binder, the way you know things intellectually before the body catches up. Now I knew it the other way. In my palms, in the pressure behind my ears. I opened the binder to Rule 1 and wrote, "The first night, I stood on the helideck and held my breath. The water below was black, blacker than any water I've seen. I felt something down there. Not saw. Felt. Like pressure building behind my eyes." At 2358, the generators kicked back on. I exhaled for the first time in 11 minutes, left the lights on, didn't sleep until well after 2. The 0700 briefing was in the dive station. Voss covered the week's schedule. 2 routine descent inspections, equipment maintenance, nothing deep, nothing near the lower markers. What are the lower markers? Below 200 meters, not part of your schedule this week. What's down there? Equipment. The kind of answer that closes questions. Santa caught my eye across the table and gave a small shake of her head. After the briefing, she walked me through the dive gear. Good equipment, better than commercial standard, some better than Navy issue. The unusual thing was the bell interior. The floor and lower walls had iron filings embedded in a resin substrate, heavier than any coating I'd seen. Rule 4, Sana said before I could ask. The dive bell must be scrubbed with iron filings after every descent. What does it actually do? She looked at the bell the way you look at something that has saved your life. It keeps things out. That's enough. We checked the filings together. Dry. Apparently the correct condition in a humid equipment bay. Someone had been very deliberate about the weight of iron in that coating. The silence protocol last night, I said. I felt something. Pressure behind my ears. Normal the first night. For most people it fades. Does it fade for you? She looked at me directly. No. But you get better at carrying it. My first dive was that afternoon. 160 meters, routine sensor inspection. Sana and I, standard 2-man descent. Down here I knew what I was doing. I'd been a lot of things in the 2 years since the Navy, some I wasn't proud of, but in the water I was still the thing they'd trained me to be. I ran my checks with the calm of 15 years in environments that killed people regularly, felt the familiar settling as the bell descended, the pressure rising evenly, the surface world receding until there was nothing but the hiss of the gas mix and the creak of the cable and the work. The rig structure disappeared above us around 50 meters. After that, nothing in any direction but the black. At 140 meters, the temperature dropped. Fast. Not a gradual thermocline shift, but a directed change, cold cutting through the suit in a way that felt specific. The instruments in my body registered it at the same moment. 3 degrees in about 15 seconds. Short of Rule 3's threshold, but close enough that I was doing the math. Sana watched the gauge. Steady, she said. I held still. The reading plateaued and then slowly normalized, the cold retreating. I breathed through the helium oxy and kept movement minimal. Then, below us, 60 or 70 meters further down, I saw the light. Green. Pulsing slowly, rhythm neither biological nor mechanical. Too bright for bioluminescence. Too steady for refracted surface light. It came from below and slightly south, and it was beautiful in the way that wrong things in deep water sometimes are. Completely, specifically wrong, and pulling at something below the level of decision. I looked at it for about 3 seconds. Then I looked away. Rule 8 was exact. I turned from the viewport, fixed my eyes on the instrument panel, and counted. Sana said nothing. I could hear her breathing through the mix, steady, professional. When I reached 300, I looked up. You saw it, she said. Green light, below, south-southwest. She reported it to the control room in a flat tone. Voss's voice came back. Noted. Ascend on schedule. We ascended on schedule. I sat in the equipment bay while Sana ran post-dive checks and noticed my hands were shaking. Pressed them flat against my thighs and breathed. 15 years, 400 hours below 200 meters. Not a man who shook after a standard descent. But something at the edge of that sighting had registered in a way that wasn't fully visual. The rhythm of the pulse. It took several minutes sitting on that bench before I could identify what it reminded me of. Something breathing. Large, patient, awake. Sana sat across from me when the checks were done. She looked at my hands, then my face. You looked away, she said. Yes. Good. A pause. some don't." There was weight in how she said it. I didn't ask the follow-up. Neither of us was ready for it yet. I went back to my cabin, opened the binder to Rule 8 and wrote, "Sana told me her father saw a light. Green, like bioluminescence, but wrong. Too bright, too steady. He swam toward it." I stopped there. I didn't have the rest of the sentence yet. I put the binder down and lay back and looked at the ceiling. The rig hummed around me. Generators, vibration, everything measurable. But underneath all of that, the other pressure. The one behind my ears that hadn't stopped since I stepped off the helicopter. Something was down there. It had been down there a long time. And it had looked at me through 60 meters of black water, and I had looked away, and that was the correct and professional thing to do. But lying on my back at the end of that first day, I was quietly certain I'd be looking at it again, that whatever lived below this rig would make sure of that. I held my breath when the generators cut at 23:47 and counted the 11 minutes by heartbeat, and when the vibration came back, I exhaled slowly and lay in the resumed hum of the rig and thought about what I'd run here to escape. The brothers hunting me felt very far away, very small. Whatever was down there was neither of those things, and unlike the brothers, it already knew I was here. I was almost certain of that by the end of the first day. By the end of the first week, I'd be sure. The second week started the same way the first ended, with the pressure behind my ears and the generators humming and the sense that something below the rig was keeping track of how many days I'd been here. I stopped going to the deck for the silence protocol. I stayed in my bunk instead, flat on my back, held my breath, counted 11 minutes by heartbeat. It was easier that way, not less frightening. Easier in the sense that I'd found a procedure for it, and procedures were something I understood. In the Navy, you dealt with dangerous environments by converting them into checklists. The silence protocol at 23:47 was on my checklist now. It didn't make the pressure go away. It made it survivable. That was the thing I learned in weeks 2 and 3, the difference between survivable and safe. The Ethelred was survivable. It was not safe and had never been safe, and the crew who'd been here longest had arrived at that distinction and made their peace with it. I watched them the way you watch experienced people in any unfamiliar environment, looking for what they do that the newer hands don't. What the veterans did was simple. They didn't waste anything. Not words, not movement, not attention. They ate without conversation. They worked without commentary. When they looked at something, they looked at it completely and then stopped. No idle staring out portholes, no lingering on deck after a shift. They did what the moment required and went somewhere else. It looked like discipline from the outside. I came to understand it was conservation. Men who had decided to burn as little energy as possible in a place where something below could feel them burning it. I started doing the same without meaning to. By the end of week 2, I was eating faster, talking less, moving through corridors with the deliberate economy I hadn't used since saturation diving. The rig was reshaping me. I didn't object. The dives in weeks 2 and 3 were routine. Sensor checks, equipment maintenance, nothing below 180 meters. Sana ran them with the same professional quiet she brought to everything. She started explaining things I hadn't asked about yet, small operational details you could only learn from someone who'd survived long enough to understand the environment. She told me which hull sections sounded hollow because the iron there had been replaced during repairs and wasn't fully integrated yet. The thing below could feel the difference, apparently. She told me the mess hall had 4 layers of iron in the walls, more than anywhere else on the platform. I started sitting with my back to the wall in the mess. The veterans already did. We didn't talk much about anything outside the work. She didn't ask why I was there, and I didn't volunteer it. What we had was the diving, the equipment, the readings. The way the water below a certain depth showed sonar return patterns that didn't match any geological formation on record. "What do the patterns look like?" I asked her once, in the bell on the way down. She thought about it. "Like breathing," she said. "Slow, regular." She didn't add anything else. Father Mateo found me in the mess at the end of week 3. I'd seen him around the rig. Thin, black cassock under his oilskins, moving through corridors with the careful quiet of someone who had learned exactly how much space to take up. He carried a small brass censer on a chain. I'd assumed it was a religious habit until I noticed he only lit it in specific corridors at specific times, and the crew gave the smoke a wide berth without seeming to notice they were doing it. He set his tray across from mine and sat without asking. "You've seen the light," he said. Not a question. "You read the control room reports." "I monitor them, yes." No apology. "You followed Rule 8 correctly. Not everyone does." I put down my fork. "What is it?" "An eye. One of many. The thing below has no fixed form. You understand this from the rules. The lights are the shapes it uses for watching. It has been watching this rig for 50 years. It is very patient." He said it the way someone explains local weather patterns. Not dramatic, just established fact. I asked what it was, not what it looked like, what it was. He was quiet for a moment. "Old," he said. "In 1349, a priest in Norway witnessed it come out of the sea. It took an entire village in a single night. He survived in a stone chapel. When it returned to the deep at dawn, he understood it was not gone, only retreated. He convinced the church to seal the entrance. He told me about the monks, the diving bells, the 3 years of construction in freezing darkness, how they'd lined the chapel walls with iron because documents older than the church described iron as the one material the thing could not easily cross, how they had drowned willingly when the last stone was set, their souls intended as reinforcement. It worked for 600 years, he said, and then someone built an oil rig above it. The consortium believed modern equipment could maintain containment more effectively than the ancient seal alone. A pause. They were not wrong, but they were also not right. The seal has been weakening since 1973. The rig slows the deterioration. It does not stop it. "The rules," I said. "Adaptations. Each rule corresponds to a behavior pattern documented by the monks." He touched the sensor. "Rule 1 comes from their observation that the thing surfaces at a predictable interval to listen for life above the seal. The monks enforced silence at that hour. The rig does the same with the generators. Rule 2, the names, comes from their understanding that the thing collects patterns. Names are distinctive. It learns them, keeps them. It calls them back," I said. Those tired eyes settled on me. "You have heard it already." I hadn't. That was still a week away. But I nodded as though I had. "The rules are not company policy," he said, standing. "They are prayers, adapted, translated into language the modern world can follow, but prayers nonetheless." He paused. "Follow them precisely. Approximation costs lives." He left me with my cooling food and the weight of 7 centuries of drowned monks, their souls still down there somewhere, reinforcing something that was slowly failing. Week 5. I was on deck running a cable inspection when I heard it. 3 beats, a pause, 3 beats. It came from below, not the hull at waterline, but deeper, conducted up through the support structure, resonating in the steel almost musically. Clear, deliberate. 3 and 3, with a pause between that was exactly as long as a person might wait before knocking again. I knew what it was before I'd finished processing the sound. I'd read Rule 5 until I had it word for word. 2 newer crew members, a young Danish rigger and an English mechanic, had stopped working and were moving toward the ladder down to the lower deck. Not running, just drifting, the way you move toward an unidentified sound that might be someone who needs help. Voss came out of the control room hatch fast. He covered the distance in 3 steps and caught the mechanic's collar. "Control room," he said. "Now." We filled it. Me, Voss, the 2 newer men, 3 others who came up when Voss's voice went over the internal comm. 4 solid walls of iron plate. We stood and listened. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. It was clearer in here, conducted through the structure. And sitting in that room through the 2nd and 3rd repetition, I understood why the rule said almost human. It had the right rhythm, roughly the right force, but the spacing was slightly off. Not wrong enough to dismiss, just wrong enough that you noticed it after the first few cycles, the way you notice a recording of a voice instead of the real thing. It went on for 14 minutes. I counted. When it stopped, no one moved for another 2 minutes. Then Voss said, "Back to work," and we filed out. Sana found me on the heli deck an hour later. We stood at the railing and looked at the water. "Your father," I said. I'd been circling it for weeks. She kept her eyes on the sea. "He was a diver here 2 years before the breach in the 90s. He went down and didn't come back." A pause. "The company said equipment failure. But you heard the recording." "I found it in the archive 6 months before I applied for this job." Her voice was even, something long since processed. "He saw the light, the green light, and he swam toward it." She stopped. His voice was calm, peaceful, like whatever he was looking at was worth going toward. "I've listened 100 times. There's no fear in it, not even at the end." "Is that why you came here?" She was quiet long enough I thought she might not answer. "I came to understand what he saw," she said. "What could make a man want to go towards something that was going to kill him?" She turned and looked at me. "I think I understand it better now." I thought about the green light on my first dive, the 3 seconds I'd spent looking at it before I managed to look away. I wrote later in the binder, next to Rule 6. I asked Sana if she'd ever lost a partner. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, 3. I reported all of them. That's my job. I didn't ask follow-ups. The dream came in week 7. I'd been sleeping badly for 2 weeks by then. Not nightmares, just a low-level restlessness. A sense of something pressing at the edges of sleep the way the thing below pressed at the seal. I'd wake at odd hours with the pressure behind my ears sharp and immediate and lie still until it faded. The dream wasn't like normal dreaming. Normal dreaming has a logic problem. Settings shift. Narratives dissolve. This was the opposite, completely, oppressively consistent. I was underwater, breathing it easy and full, surrounded by stone walls that had been there for 7 centuries. The chapel was small, stained glass windows that had no business being intact at that depth, and behind them a light, not the green from the deep, but amber, the color of very old candlelight through old glass. Voices chanting in Latin, slow, steady, and then a voice that wasn't Latin, a voice that said my name. Marcus Anthony Shepard. My mother, dead 12 years. Her exact voice, the particular weight she put on all 3 parts of my name when something was serious. I came awake gasping. The clock read 23:47. The generators had just cut. The silence protocol was active. I lay completely still in the dark and felt the pressure in my ears, sharper than it had ever been, and listened to my own heartbeat and nothing else for 11 minutes. The generators came back at 23:58. I let my breath out slowly. I opened the binder, found Rule 7 by feel in the dark, and wrote, I dreamed of the chapel in week 7, stone walls, water pressing against stained glass, a voice chanting my full name. I woke up gasping. I didn't request transfer. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see it. Maybe I already knew I wasn't leaving. I also turned back to Rule 2 and wrote, "Third week, I heard my mother. She's been dead 12 years. She called my full name, Marcus Anthony Shepard, from somewhere beneath the rig. I stood at the railing and listened. I didn't answer, but I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. I lay in the dark afterward and thought about the voice. It had come from inside my dreaming, not from the water. But the binder said the dream meant it had found me in sleep, and that it would find me in waking soon after. I believed that. I believed all of it now in a way I hadn't in week 1 when the rules had still been strange. I told Sana at breakfast. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put her coffee down and looked at me. 48 hours to request surface duty, she said. I know. It gives you more time, not safety. Time. I thought about the 2 years of running. The aliases, the cash jobs, the rented rooms, waking in unfamiliar places and checking exits before I'd fully opened my eyes. I thought about the brothers on land, still looking. I thought about how small all of that felt compared to what was 300 meters below where we were sitting. Running had always been temporary. I'd been waiting, without knowing it, for something that was worse to run from than whatever was behind me. I'm not requesting transfer, I said. Sana nodded, not surprised. I didn't think you would. She picked up her coffee and didn't push it, and we finished breakfast in the quiet we'd been building since week 1. That evening, I stood at the port railing and looked down into the water. The light was going, the last of October pulling color out of the sea, and the water below was darkening through gray toward black. I looked down, and after a moment, I felt, not heard, not saw, felt, something below looking back. Not the background pressure, something more direct. Eye contact across a very large distance. I didn't look away this time. I stood there until the dark was complete. Then I went inside. Whatever was down there knew I'd seen the light and looked away. Knew I'd heard the dream and stayed. Knew I wasn't leaving. I wasn't running. For the first time in 2 years, I was standing still. I didn't know yet what that was going to cost me, but I was going to find out. Week 8 started wrong. I noticed it the morning after I stood at the railing and felt the thing looking back. The rig had a rhythm by then. I'd been on the Ethelred long enough that I could feel when it was off, the same way you can feel a change in a ship's engine before any instrument registers it. The weight of the air had changed. Not the smell, not the temperature, just the weight. Like the pressure differential I'd felt since my first day had quietly increased a notch. The crew felt it too. The veterans were more watchful than usual, which said something. Conversations that were already short got shorter. I watched Halverson, the Finnish diver, who'd been here longer than anyone except Voss, run his hands along the iron bolts in his bunkroom doorframe before going to sleep, testing each one. He caught me watching and didn't look embarrassed, just nodded and went inside. Voss was spending hours in the control room, not reviewing logs or talking on the radio, but standing in the middle of the room watching the instrument panels. All of them. The way you watch something you don't trust to stay stable. I asked Sana what the readings showed. Pressure variance below 200 meters, she said. Building for 3 days. How much variance? She looked at me. Enough. Father Mateo had started burning the sensor in the corridors continuously. Twice daily, same route. The smoke sitting in the passageways long after he'd passed. He'd told me back in week 3 that it blurred the rig's heat signatures, disrupted the thing's ability to press toward warmth. He was burning a lot of it now, which meant the signal needed a lot of blurring. Larson went missing on the 3rd day of week 8. 26, Danish, 2nd rotation. Solid diver, right habits. Back to the wall, voice down. Silence protocol without reminders. One of the crew I had mentally marked as someone who would last. He and his dive partner Bjorn went down for a routine sensor check at 140 meters. I was in the equipment bay doing bell maintenance when the docking sequence ran, and Bjorn climbed out of the hatch and sat down on the floor immediately, like his legs had simply stopped, still in his suit, face the color of old concrete. He didn't speak for several minutes. When he did, his voice was flat in the way that happens when someone has run out of the capacity for inflection. "The temperature dropped," he said. I looked down. He was reaching for something green. He stopped. Then he was gone. I looked at the bell. The iron filings on the floor were dry. Whatever had taken Larson had taken him in open water before he could reach the bell, fast. That thought, whether Larson had seen the light and chosen not to look away, sat with me through the rest of the day and didn't let go. Voss called me and Sana to his office that afternoon. He stood rather than sat, hands in his jacket pockets. "The seal is leaking. Pressure readings confirm it. What took Larson was a fragment, a projection, through a crack in the lower section." He looked at both of us. "We need to know the damage." "The chapel," Sana said. "You'll descend to 300 meters. Visual inspection of the chapel exterior. The door, the stonework, the outer iron lining. You report every breach you can identify." He paused. "You don't enter. You don't approach the door. You inspect and come back up." Sana said yes immediately. 300 meters was deep saturation work. Trimix blend, near total darkness, pressure that would kill anything not built for it, next to a structure actively leaking. The last man down in that area today hadn't come back. "All right," I said. Voss held his measuring look for one more second, then nodded. "Tomorrow morning, full pre-dive protocol. Matteo adjusts the sensor route to cover the equipment bay." He said the last part like operational detail, not like the thing that told you exactly how serious the situation was. We went down the next morning. Pre-dive took 2 hours. Every component checked twice, iron filings verified dry, trimix blend calibrated for 300 meters, comms tested and retested. Sana ran through it with complete attention, and I matched her step for step, and the 2 hours of procedure were the calmest I felt all day. Then we were in the bell, and the bell was descending, and the water closed over the viewport, the North Atlantic stages on the way down. First 50 meters, light fades from gray to deep blue, 50 to 100, deep blue to something almost purple. Below 100, black, and all you have is the bell's exterior lights, a cone of visibility 6 meters in any direction, and beyond that, nothing. At 160, the instrument started fluctuating, not failing, inconsistent. The sonar return from below showed the breathing pattern Sana had described weeks ago, slow and regular, but stronger, closer. At 220, the chapel appeared below us. It resolved slowly as we descended. Old stone encrusted with centuries of growth, barnacles and cold water coral built up until the surface was more biology than masonry. But under the growth, the shape was unmistakably worked stone, cut, fitted, deliberate, low and heavy, built the way you build something when you're not coming back to fix it. The walls were thick. The iron bolts in the stone had gone dark with age, but were still seated. The stained glass windows were intact. 600 years of deep water and they were still there, and behind them, the green-white light pulsed slow and steady. The same light from my first dive, the same light Sana's father had followed. I kept my eyes on the stonework. "Door," Sana said on comms. The chapel door was on the south face. Iron-banded wood that should not still have been wood after 6 centuries underwater, but was. It was not fully closed, open about 4 inches, and from the gap the light leaked through. Sana keyed to Voss. Visual on the chapel. Door open approximately 10 centimeters. Green light visible. Voss came back flat and immediate. Confirmed. Don't approach. Begin exterior inspection from current position. We spent 40 minutes working systematically around the structure from the bell. East and north faces intact, iron bolts still seated. The west face had a crack running from the roof line down about 2 meters. Not a collapse, a separation in the mortar. The kind that happens when something presses outward from inside for several centuries. I noted it, Sana noted it, we moved on. Then she said, "South face." And we looked, and the door was open wider. Not 4 inches, closer to 8. While we'd been inspecting the other walls, something inside had pushed it further. I was already watching the temperature sensor when it dropped. 5 degrees, 8 seconds. "Up," Sana said. Same tone as my first dive. Just the word. I was already moving, pulling us back from the viewport, hands on the ascent controls. The bell started rising. The chapel receded below us, and in the gap of the open door the green light pulsed. And then something appeared in the gap that wasn't light, the opposite. A section of the doorway that absorbed what little illumination there was and gave nothing back. A region where the water behaved differently, where the bell's exterior lamps simply stopped, absorbed, not reflected. It came through the door slowly, the way something large moves when it isn't used to being constrained by door frames. Not all of it, something that felt like a piece of a much larger thing still pressing against the seal inside. It had no fixed shape. Within the dark region, things moved and resolved briefly and dissolved. Something long and articulated, something that curved the wrong direction, something that suggested a jaw too large to be reasonable. And eyes. Dozens of them, opening and closing without pattern, each one catching the lamplight and throwing it back as a green-tinged reflection. Every reflection showed the same thing. The inside of the bell. Sana. Me. I pulled my eyes from the viewport, kept my hands on the ascent controls, counted the rate. The temperature dropped another 3 degrees. The pressure in my ears spiked. Not from depth change, from proximity. Then it spoke. Not through the water. Through the comms. Through the equipment. Through whatever it used that had no name I knew. Marcus Anthony Shepard. My real name. The name I hadn't spoken on this rig, hadn't written anywhere, hadn't used in 8 months. Said in a voice that wasn't anyone I recognized. Not my mother, not anyone. Something that had been collecting the sound of names in the dark for 700 years and had learned how to assemble them. I kept my hands on the controls. Rule 2, don't respond. I didn't. Sana's hand was on my arm. I didn't know when she'd put it there, firm, through the suit. The most concrete thing in the world right then. The bell kept rising. At 180 meters, the temperature normalized. The comms went quiet. When I looked at the viewport again, there was nothing below us but regular dark. I exhaled. We docked 12 minutes later. I climbed out and sat on the equipment bay floor with my back against the iron wall. My hands were shaking, both of them this time, not just one. Worse than after the first dive. Voss was in the bay. He watched me from across the room. No expression. After a while, the shaking slowed and I pressed my hands flat against my thighs. "It said my name," I said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not surprise. Recognition. The look of a man who knew exactly what I meant. because it had happened to him too. "They always do," he said. Then he walked out. Sana came to the decompression chamber an hour later during mandatory pressure reduction. She sat across from me in the small space and didn't say anything for a while. I kept running through the observable data. A fragment had breached the chapel door and come into open water. It had used the comms to say my name, and then it had watched us rise and made no move to follow. That last part was the thing I kept returning to. It had let us go. Not because it couldn't have stopped us. I didn't think the iron seals on the bell would have held indefinitely at that range. It had let us go because it wanted us to come back. It had my name now, spoken aloud in its presence. It knew what I was and where I would be. Sana was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully name, something between pity and something else. The something else was what I recognized from how she'd talked about her father. "He sounded happy," I said. "On the recording?" She nodded. "It said my name," I said. And for a second, just a second, I wanted to answer. She didn't look surprised. "I know," she said. We sat in the decompression chamber and said nothing else, and the pressure equalized around us slowly, and 300 meters below, the chapel door was open, and something very old was waiting to see what we would do next. The council met the morning after Sana and I came out of decompression. Voss had called it for 7 o'clock in the control room. Me, Sana, Father Matteo, Halverson, and 2 senior crew I knew by face, but not well. 7 people in a room built for instruments, standing because there weren't enough chairs. The panels behind Voss showed the same readings they'd been showing for 3 days. Pressure variance below 200 meters, climbing slow and steady like a temperature that wasn't breaking. Voss stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and looked at all of us once before speaking. "The door cannot be closed from outside," he said. "The iron banding on the frame is cracked. The mechanism is broken from the inside, something pressing against it for a long time, and the frame finally gave. Without the door seated, the seal degrades. We have 4 days, maybe 5. "What happens at 5 days?" I asked. "It comes through," Voss said. "Not a fragment, the thing itself." Matteo had his sensor in his hands, unlit, turning it slowly. "The original solution is the only solution. A willing soul, placed inside the chapel and remaining there freely, reinforces the barrier more effectively than stone or iron. The seal was always partly structural and partly inhabited. The monks who drowned here in 1350 did not just build it, they became it." He paused. "A soul given willingly is stronger than any stone. Father Ron documented this himself, and everything since has confirmed it. The rules exist because of that knowledge, so does this rig." Outside, the North Atlantic pressed against the hull the way it always had, indifferent and cold and completely uninterested in our problem. "Someone has to go in," Voss said. "Reach the altar, place their hands on the stone, stay willingly, that is the requirement." He looked around the room. "It held for 600 years. Halverson looked at the floor. The senior crew looked at the instrument panels. Sana looked at me. I thought about the brothers on land who had been looking for me for 2 years. I thought about the name. Marcus Anthony Shepard. The one the thing below had spoken through the comms like it had always known it. I thought about Danny, my dead partner. The salvage job that went wrong, the company's offer, the document I had signed to keep the blame from spreading further. Danny's brothers had found out anyway. I'd been moving every 6 months since, never long enough to put anything down, carrying the weight of what I had and hadn't done. I had told myself it was penance. After a while, it had just been weight. "I'll go," I said. Sana closed her eyes. Just for a second. Voss looked at me. The measuring look had been there since my first day, always calculating which category a person fell into. Whatever he found, he nodded. Prep starts at noon. You go down at 1400. I had 4 hours. I spent the first in the equipment bay running through the bell alone. Pre-dive checks, even for a dive with no post-dive plan. 15 years of habit doesn't stop because the context has changed. The filings were dry, every component within spec. I calibrated the trimix for 300 meters and sat on the bench afterward with my hands on my knees, listening to the rig hum. Sana came in around 0900 and sat across from me without speaking for a while. I could go instead, she said. No. My father went down here. It might make more sense. No. Same word, same tone, second time. You know this rig better than anyone below Voss. They need you here for the long work, and I've been running for 2 years. There's nothing left on the surface I'm not running from. Down there it at least means something. I paused. It's always meant something. I just didn't know what until now. She didn't argue. She was too honest for arguments that weren't going to hold. I went to my cabin and got the notepad from the shelf beside the binder. I sat on my bunk and wrote a letter to my mother. She'd been dead 12 years. I wrote it anyway, because there were things I'd never said to her, and there was a version of Danny's death I had never told anyone, honestly. Not the version I'd signed off on with the company, not the version Danny's brothers had decided was true, the real version. What happened on the job, what the company offered me, what I chose, and what that choice had actually been about. I wrote all of it down. I folded it and brought it back to Sana in the equipment bay. After, I said. Her eyes were wet. The most I'd seen from her in 8 weeks, and she didn't hide it. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. The steadiness in my voice was real, which surprised me a little. I've been running my whole life. It's time to stop. She nodded once, the way she nodded when something was settled. Then she helped me finish prep and we talked only about the equipment, and that was exactly right. Voss walked me to the bay at 1350 and stood while I suited up. He was quiet through most of it. When I was nearly ready, he said, "The altar is at the back of the chapel. Stone table, iron cross mounted on the wall above it. You'll see it." Matteo briefed me, I said. I know. He was quiet for a moment. I went down in 83. Smaller breach. Instrument failure on a containment dive. I exited the bell before the iron seal was verified. Something was there. It spoke my name. He reached down and touched his left leg without seeming to notice he was doing it. The limp that had been there on my first day and that he had never explained. I answered it. Then I tried to run from it for 2 years. You can't run from something that knows your name. It stays with you wherever you go. He looked at me. Going down willingly is different. The monks understood that. Their seal lasted 6 centuries because they chose it. He paused. Just get to the altar. Hands on the stone. Hold on. Operational instructions. No sentiment. Just the job. One last time. I climbed into the bell. The last thing I saw before the hatch closed was Sana's face. The folded letter was visible in her jacket pocket. She wasn't crying now. She was watching me the way she watched everything, completely, without waste. That was worth holding for a second, so I held it. Then the hatch sealed and there was only the bell and the cable and the water building against the hull as the winch began. The water closed over the viewport, gray to deep blue, blue to near purple, purple to black. Instruments tracking depth, the numbers incremental and steady. Pressure rising in my ears, equalization, the routine mechanics of a descent I'd run hundreds of times in 2 different careers. except the post-dive plan was blank and the bell would go back up without me. At 160 meters, the sonar breathing started. Stronger than on the assessment dive 2 days ago, slower. The rhythm of something that had been waiting a long time and could feel the wait ending. The chapel appeared at 312 meters. The door was open close to 40 centimeters now, the green-white light spilling through the gap and catching the sediment around the entrance. I docked the bell against the exterior wall, engaged the iron locking bolts, and opened the hatch. The cold came first. Rule 3's cold. The cold the thing generated. I wasn't surfacing. I pushed through the hatch into open water and moved toward the door. The water inside the chapel was warm. It changed the moment I crossed the threshold. The external cold cut off and was replaced by a warmth that had no business at this depth, the kind that accumulates in stone walls over centuries and stays. The pressure in my ears shifted and became the watching pressure I'd cataloged since my first night on the Ethelred, amplified until it was almost physical. The chanting was there, not through equipment, just present in the water, the Latin syllables moving through the deep at their slower-than-air speed, the stone walls vibrating with them. The monks who had drowned here in 1350 were still chanting. Their voices had become part of the structure, the way the iron bolts were part of the structure. I moved through the corridor, stone altars to either side, old and crusted with centuries of growth. On the floor, through the settled sediment, the shapes of bones. The monks, in place where they had drowned, arranged without panic. The way you arrange yourself when the arrangement is the point. I understood that better than I would have 8 weeks ago. The sanctuary opened at the end, larger, higher ceiling. The stained glass window pulsed its green-white light, slower now, the intervals between each pulse stretched. The altar was a stone table, waist-high with an iron cross on the wall above it, the iron dark with age but solid. In front of the altar, the thing waited, more deliberate than the fragment I'd seen 2 days ago. Roughly the shape of a person standing, put together without a full understanding of how proportion worked. Too tall, wrong in the ratios, dark in the way that creates a hole in the world rather than an object in it. 2 eyes open, reflective, catching the green light and throwing it back. It spoke. My mother's voice. Danny's voice, which I hadn't heard in 2 years and still recognized immediately. And a third voice I had never heard but knew. Sana's father, the recording she had memorized 100 times, calm and peaceful at the end. All 3 layered on top of each other. Marcus Anthony Shepard. You came. We knew you would. I didn't answer. I walked toward the altar. The thing shifted sideways, making room, not blocking. The way something large moves when it has decided to allow passage. I felt the cold of its proximity as I passed. The reading I'd been watching on instrument dials translated into direct sensation, and then I was past it and my hands came down on the stone. The altar was warm, more than the water. 7 centuries of pressure from below and the contact of the monks before me had worked into the stone and stayed. My hands felt the residual weight of all of it, ancient and specific, going in both directions at once. The thing pressed against me from behind. The watching pressure came in hard, trying to find grip, trying to pull me back from the stone. It used the voices again, briefly. I wasn't listening anymore. I held. The stone warmed further. The chanting shifted. Something older running under the Latin. A single, sustained note felt in the chest more than heard. The kind that moves through bone rather than air. The green light in the window dimmed, degree by degree. My connection to the surface faded gradually, the way a radio signal goes with depth. The surface was still there. Sana with the letter in her pocket. Voss watching the instruments. Matteo walking the sensor route through the corridors. At 23:47 tonight, the generators would cut and the rig would go silent for 11 minutes, and the thing in the deep would surface to listen and find nothing to reach for because I would be here, holding. The signal went to static. The static faded. There was only the chapel and the stone and the thing pressing at the edges of everything, and the long, patient work of holding against it. Through the stone, through the water, through the long, dark distance, I could feel the bell rising without me, carrying Sana's face pressed against the viewport, watching the place where I had been until there was only dark. I took this job because I was running. Now I'm not running anymore. I'm 300 meters down in a stone chapel built by monks who drowned before my great-grandparents were born. The thing is out there, pressing against the seal. It knows my name. It always will. But for now, it holds. And I hold with it. That's the job. That's always been the job. The call came at 2 in the morning, which was fine because I hadn't been sleeping anyway. I was on my couch with the TV on and the sound off, watching the colors move across the wall. 3 empty bottles on the coffee table. A 4th, still half full, balanced on the armrest. Daniel's denim jacket was draped over the back of the chair across from me, the one I never sat in anymore. 3 months since the case was closed and I still hadn't moved it. It still smelled like desert dust and the cheap cedar soap he used to buy in bulk from the gas station off Route 89. My phone buzzed against the cushion. Unknown number. I almost let it go. I'd been getting a lot of those since the termination. Union reps, journalists who'd heard about Marsh County, twice a blocked line that said nothing when I picked up. But it was 2 in the morning and I was on my 4th drink, and I answered. Cross, I said. Old habit. I hadn't been Trooper Cross in 4 months. The voice was flat. Not cold, just flat, worn down by repetition. Mile marker 47, County Road 8N. Midnight tomorrow, 5,000 cash. Don't be late. The line went quiet. I set the phone down and opened my laptop and typed County Road 8N into the search bar. Nothing. I tried it with the county, with the state. I pulled up the Arizona DOT registry. No County Road 8N existed anywhere in the database. I sat back. Then I did what I always did at 2 in the morning. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled DRC, Daniel Robert Cross, and pulled up the audio file. 4 minutes and 11 seconds. His last call. I let it play while I kept searching. Near the 2-minute mark he said it, and I almost mouthed along. There's a booth out here, Eli, and I can't find the marker on any map. It says 47, but there's no 8N. I was on 191 and then I wasn't, and there's a light on inside. I closed the file, found a Sharpie and wrote the address on my palm. Mile marker 47, County Road 8N. I went to bed and didn't sleep. By the time the sun came up, I'd already decided. I left Flagstaff at 5 in the afternoon. My truck was a 2009 F-150 with a cracked dash and 200,000 miles, but it was the only thing I owned that could handle a bad road. I packed light. Water, a jacket, the old service flashlight I'd kept when they took everything else. And the file. 23 pages of Daniel's case summary folded into my jacket pocket. I'd carried it so long the fold lines had become tears. The first hour was straightforward. South on 191, the same highway Daniel had been driving. At mile 44, the road got rougher. At mile 46, it dropped to 2 lanes without a center stripe. At mile 47, I slowed to a crawl. Nothing. Open desert, scrub brush, red dirt, First stars in the east. I pulled to the shoulder and got out and looked around. No side road, no sign. My GPS showed me on an unclassified route, the position line flickering. I drove on, turned around a mile up at a ranch gate, came back. Still nothing. Third pass at mile 47, and there it was. A glass booth on the shoulder, lit from inside by a single bulb. A road stretching east behind it into the dark, black asphalt, fresh-looking, disappearing into nothing. Just the booth and the light and the road, like something had been set down while I wasn't looking. A man stood by the booth door holding a tin coffee cup, watching my headlights. Mid-60s, Filipino-American, stocky, faded denim jacket with a patch on the breast I couldn't make out from a distance. When I got close, I saw his left hand around the cup. 3 fingers. The last 2 were gone below the second knuckle. The skin there smooth and long-heeled. He didn't say his name. "Read everything on the card," he said. "Read it until you don't need to." He pulled the door open. I stepped inside, smaller than it looked from outside. A counter worn smooth, the wood so polished by decades of hands it had no grain left. A metal stamp on a short chain. A lockbox bolted to the floor, combination dial. A narrow aluminum coin tray. 1 stool. No phone, no radio. A clock on the wall. Heavy, mechanical, with a second hand that moved in slow, deliberate ticks, each one louder than the last. A laminated card was taped to the inside of the glass at eye level. I read it. 8 rules. I read them twice, then 3 times. Some made immediate sense. Take coins only with your left hand. Speak only the toll. 3 copper, 1 passage. Maintain the rhythm. 3 seconds per passenger. Others I turned over in my head. Never answer a voice you recognize. I stayed on that one. The last rule was the shortest. Break any rule and you become a passenger. There is no rescue, no appeal. The man outside spoke through the glass. "Left hand for coins, right hand flat on the counter. It doesn't leave the counter." He reached through the coin slot and laid something in the tray. I picked it up with my right hand out of instinct, and he said, "Left," without any impatience. I switched. The coin was bone. White, dense, cold in a way that went past the night air, settling into the joints of my fingers. Carved with a spiral on one face that seemed to shift when I moved it. The lines tracking the motion in a way that made my eyes water if I stared too long. And when I held it, I felt it. A faint vibration, like a tuning fork struck in another room. "Again," he said. I put it back. He set it in the tray. I took it with my left. Cold. Vibration. He took it back. He walked me through the motion from outside the glass. Left hand takes the coin, drops it in the tray. Right hand lifts the stamp and presses it to the ticket. Reset. 4 seconds the first time. He said, "Again," before I'd finished, and I understood. The point wasn't to get it right. The point was to make it automatic, fast enough that my hands moved before my mind registered what was standing at the window. We practiced close to an hour. My left hand memorized the weight of the coin, the vibration, the way the cold spread through the palm. My right hand found the stamp by feel. By the end, I could do it eyes closed. When he was satisfied, he stepped back. "At midnight, you close your eyes. Count to 60. When you open them, the road will be there and the first passenger will be waiting. 3 seconds. Don't rush, don't slow down." I had 23 pages of questions in my jacket. I had a recording I'd listened to 100 times. I had a brother who'd called from this mile marker and never called again. I didn't ask any of it. Something in how he stood told me that questions had a cost here. "I'll be back at dawn," he said. He walked to a truck parked 20 yards back in the dark. Door closed. Nothing else. I was alone. I sat on the stool and read the rules out loud, quietly. The clock ticked. The bulb overhead buzzed with a low frequency I felt more than heard. The air smelled like ozone and old coins. My right palm was flat on the counter. The worn wood was warm, which surprised me. A counter in the desert at night should have been cold. I went through the motion without a coin. Extend left. Take. Drop. Stamp. Reset. 11:47. I checked the clock. The desert outside was completely dark. No headlights. No horizon glow. The dirt road I'd driven in on was gone. I'd noticed that around 10:30 and decided not to think about it. I pressed my right palm harder against the wood, steadied my breathing. I thought about Daniel, and then stopped because the clock read 11:59 and the air pressure changed, a sudden pop in my ears like dropping altitude. I closed my eyes. At first, just dark and the ticking clock and my own breathing. Then I heard it, a sound I have no good comparison for. The closest I can get is something very large unrolling from a height, like a bolt of heavy fabric dropped from a roof, but the weight was wrong, the resonance too deep, moving through the ground instead of the air. The floor vibrated. My back teeth ached, the ozone smell sharpened. I counted, lips moving, 1, 2, 3. At 22, I heard a soft displacement of air outside, like someone stepping close. At 31, cloth moving. I kept my eyes closed. At 56, the vibration stopped. 60. I opened my eyes. The road stretched east from the booth into a darkness so complete it had texture. Black, dense, receding to a vanishing point that hurt to focus on. The asphalt was wet-looking. 10 feet from the window, in my peripheral vision, a figure stood at the coin slot. I did not look at its face. I looked at its hand. Gray. Not the gray of illness, but a flat, even gray like unfinished stone. The sleeve above was a work shirt, grease-stained, old. A mechanic's shirt. I extended my left hand. The coin dropped into my palm. Bone. Cold. Carved. The vibration moved up through the joints of my fingers and stayed. I dropped it in the tray, right hand to the stamp. 3 copper, 1 passage. My voice came out flat, which surprised me. I pressed the stamp. Reset. The figure moved past the window without sound. No footsteps. Just there, then not. The next was already at the window. I found the rhythm the way you find a stride on a long run, not thinking about it, just letting the body do what it practiced. Left out. Coin in palm. Cold. Vibration, weight, drop, stamp, reset. 3 seconds. The voice became a sound more than words, just the right syllables at the right intervals. I kept my eyes on the coin slot and my own hands. I heard the rustle of fabric, the soft clink of bone coins in the tray, the tick of the clock between transactions. Sweat gathered at my collar despite the cold. The line stretched into the dark. I saw it only in pieces, shapes at the edge of my vision, figures in clothes I couldn't place. Some short, some tall, none of them making a sound with their feet. I didn't look up. I kept my right palm flat on the wood and my left hand in its loop and my voice saying the same 6 words in the same flat tone. Around 2 in the morning, one figure paused a beat longer than the others. 1 extra second. Long enough that I felt the rhythm wobble in my chest. I held the stamp over the ticket and counted. 1, 2, 3. Pressed it down on 3. The figure moved on. The rhythm came back like something snapping into place. At 4 a.m., they stopped. I was mid-motion when I noticed no coin had dropped. I waited. 3 beats. Nothing. I looked up. The road was withdrawing. The far end was simply gone, and the asphalt was pulling back toward the booth like a tide going out, rolling back on itself, exposing the ground beneath. The ground it left behind was wrong, a darkness that looked like depth rather than shadow, like the road had been covering a hole that went down farther than anything natural should go. I forced my eyes to the counter and kept them there until the withdrawal sound stopped. When I looked up, there was just desert. Cold, pre-dawn, the horizon going faintly orange in the east. I sat still for a long time. The old man's truck rolled up around 5. He counted the bone coins from the tray with his 3-fingered hand, locked them in a steel box, then passed a paper bag through the slot, bundled cash, 5,000 by the weight. "Most don't last the first night," he said. He stepped back. That was all. I drove home in the early light with the cash on the passenger seat and Daniel's case file in my jacket. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove straight to the apartment and lay down on top of the covers without taking my boots off. I slept 3 hours. Dreamless at first, and then not. The dream was simple. I was at the booth window, the road full in front of me, a procession stretching as far as I could see. I was working the rhythm. Left hand, drop, stamp, reset. And my voice was saying the toll without me choosing to say it. At some point, I looked down at my right hand. It had left the counter. I woke up with my left hand extended toward the bedroom door, palm up, fingers curled the way they curled around a bone coin. My right hand was pressed flat against the mattress. I lay there and looked at the ceiling. I'd go back. I already knew that. The address was still on my palm in Sharpie, faded but legible. 47, 8 North. The same numbers Daniel had read from a marker he said he couldn't find on any map. I pressed my right palm harder against the mattress and waited for my left hand to stop shaking. 12 shifts in, I stopped counting the passengers. I don't mean I lost track, I mean I stopped trying. Somewhere around the 6th or 7th night, I realized counting was the wrong instinct. Counting meant thinking, and thinking meant gaps, and gaps were where the rhythm broke. So I let go of the numbers and just worked the motion, left hand out, coin in palm, cold, vibration, drop, stamp, reset, 3 seconds. The next one was always already there. By the 12th shift, I was arriving at 10 in the evening. I'd sit in the booth with the lights off and run the motion in the dark for 2 hours before midnight. Take, drop, stamp, reset. My left hand knew the weight of a bone coin the way a musician knows a chord, without having to think toward it. My right hand hadn't left the counter surface during a shift in over a week. I didn't realize I'd built that habit until Augustine pointed it out without pointing it out. He'd started giving me a single nod when he came to the window at dawn to count the tray. That was all. From him, it felt like high praise. The apartment had changed without me making any decisions about it. The drinking stopped in the 2nd week. Not a choice I remember making, more like the whiskey stopped working, and one evening I set the bottle under the sink and it didn't occur to me to retrieve it. Daniel's jacket was still on the chair I never sat in. I'd started talking to it in the mornings, small things, what the weather was like, whether the shift had been busy, whether the rhythm had stayed solid or slipped and been caught. It seemed less strange the longer I did it. Maybe it was always strange. I'd stopped being able to tell. The case file was still folded in my jacket pocket, 23 pages worn through at the folds. I hadn't opened it since the first night. Everything in it was already in my head. What I was doing at the booth felt more like progress than anything those pages had ever offered. I didn't know yet what I was progressing toward, but I kept going back. It was the 13th shift when I first saw her. A slow night, longer gaps between passengers than usual. I'd been working for about 2 hours when a lull hit, and I sat on the stool and let my eyes rest on the middle distance. The glass caught my reflection, tired face, collar of my jacket, and behind my reflection, a woman. She was standing where there was no room to stand. Gray hair, cut short, something like a work uniform with a chest patch I couldn't read from the angle. She looked about 60, patient-faced, like someone who had made peace with a very long wait some time ago and had been at peace with it ever since. I didn't turn around. In 13 shifts, I'd built a sense for the booth that went past the laminated card. Turning toward something in the glass felt as wrong as looking at a passenger's face. Not a rule I could point to, just something the nights had taught me without words. I watched her in the reflection. She watched me back. Then she smiled, small, and when she spoke, the voice didn't come through the air. It came from inside my head, clear and directionless, the way a song does when it's been sitting in there all day. You're learning. Faster than most. A coin dropped in the tray. I turned to the slot, took it, stamped, reset. 3 copper, 1 passage. When I looked back at the glass, she was gone. She came back on the 15th shift, then the 16th. After that, I stopped tracking it and just expected her during the slow parts. Her name came to me over several nights. Maria. First operator, 1973. She gave information the way Augustine gave warnings. In fragments. Offered without explanation, only when she chose to. I didn't push. The booth had already taught me that asking for more than what was offered tended to get you nothing. The road had been there long before any operator, long before any booth. She said it the way you'd say a river had been running before anyone built a bridge across it. The booth existed because of 6 men, a survey crew who drove onto the road in 1923 and never came back. Their truck turned up weeks later, 200 miles away, engine still running, keys in the ignition, windows intact. No men inside, no sign of where they'd gone. Someone looked at what had happened and decided a checkpoint was needed. Someone made an agreement with something that had been old before the government doing the agreeing existed. The booth is the agreement, Maria said, from inside my skull, her reflection still in the dark glass. The operator holds it. As long as the rules are followed, the road keeps its end. The passengers keep moving. They stay on the road and the road stays separate from everything else. And if there's no operator? I asked once. The road doesn't close. It just stops having a checkpoint. I asked about the conductor during the 19th shift. A direct question after a long silence. She took her time before answering. The oldest thing on the road. It was there before the booth, before the agreement. It enforces the rules, not for the passenger's sake, for its own. It feeds on mistakes, on the gaps that rule-breaking leaves behind. It has worn 1,000 faces from the ones it has taken. A pause. It has been watching you since week 5. It is curious. It has not seen an operator resist this long. It will test you. It is very good at finding what a person cannot ignore. I kept my eyes on the coin slot. Curious felt worse than threatening. I already knew what I couldn't ignore, and I figured it did too. I worked the rest of that shift without talking. Week 6, around 2 in the morning, a lull stretched long. I was sitting on the stool with my right palm on the counter when I heard it. A woman's voice, from the dark at the edge of the road, the place where the asphalt ended and the wrong dark began. Please. Thin and frightened. I'm lost. I need help. Is someone there? My right hand moved toward the door handle before I caught it and pressed it flat. The voice came again, closer. I can hear you in there. Please, I just need help. Maria appeared in the glass. The first one is always the hardest, she said. They choose a voice that sounds ordinary, normal and frightened and reasonable. The road has been collecting voices for a very long time. Every person who ever crossed onto it and was taken has left something behind. The road keeps them. The voice called again, and the pitch was slightly off this time. Barely, the way a recording sounds when the tape has stretched. I kept my palm flat on the wood. I kept my eyes forward. The voice faded slowly, evenly, the way a signal fades when the distance grows too large. When it was fully gone, I exhaled. My right hand was shaking. "Does it get easier?" I asked. Her reflection was already gone. Week 7 was the hardest night since the first. They came in a flood. More passengers than I'd ever processed in a single shift, the line packed close and stretching all the way to the vanishing point. I worked faster, 3 seconds per passenger, but the line wasn't thinning the way it should, and the figures were pressing in toward the window. Their smooth gray knot faces angled toward the glass, toward me, in a way they hadn't before. Not all of them, but enough. 3 seconds became 2, then close to 1. I noticed it when my right hand started cramping from the pace, and I stopped, closed my eyes for one breath, counted 3 seconds out loud under my breath, and took the next coin. The rhythm snapped back solid. I held it through the rest of the line, but near the end of the shift, something had stopped at the back. The passengers were thinning, the road was clearing, and in the open space behind the last of them, a tall shape stood near the far end of the road, near the blurring point where the asphalt and the dark became indistinguishable. Long coat. Still. Not a passenger. Passengers didn't stop, didn't stand in place once they'd cleared the window. This had come from somewhere behind the line and simply halted, and it was watching. The last passenger took the coin slot. I stamped and reset. The road stretched empty between me and the shape at the back. Then 4 a.m. came, and the road began to withdraw, and the shape went with it, pulled back into the dark, the same as everything else. I told Maria about it the next shift. "It has been watching since week 5. You saw it clearly for the first time. What does it want? To know if you'll break. Most operators break in the first 2 nights. A few last a week. You are at 7. It has not seen that in a long time. It will use whatever you cannot ignore." I already knew what that was. I worked the rest of the shift in silence. 22nd shift. The quiet before dawn. The last passenger cleared the window around 3:45. I set the stamp, placed my hands, and watched the empty road. I counted down the minutes to 4 a.m. in my head. Then I heard it. Eli. His voice. Not close to it. His actual voice. The exact register and the slight roughness he always had when he'd been quiet for a while. The voice from the recording I'd played 100 times in my Flagstaff apartment. "Eli, I'm here. I'm lost." My left hand released the coin tray without me deciding to. My right hand lifted from the counter for the first time in days. I felt it happen the way you feel a stumble. The awareness arriving just after the fact. I've been walking so long. I want to come home. Tears ran down my face. Part of my mind just heard Daniel, scared, tired, asking to come in from somewhere cold, and that part didn't process it as a trick. It processed it as my brother. My hand was on the door handle. "Elias," Maria's voice, from inside my skull. Hard this time, none of the patience I was used to. "Look at me." I turned my head. Her reflection was in the glass and her face was different. Not calm, not patient, not the 60-year-old woman who had all the time in the world. "That is not your brother." Your brother looked at a passenger. He spoke to one. He broke 2 rules in one night, and the road took him. What you are hearing is the conductor. It has been carrying Daniel's voice since the night it took him. It saves voices. It waits until it knows what an operator cannot ignore, and then it uses it. How do you know? Because Daniel walks the road. Passengers don't call out. Passengers walk. The only thing that calls from outside the road is the thing that put them there. Outside, the voice said, Eli, please, don't leave me here. I closed my eyes, stood in the dark behind my eyelids with my hand still on the handle and my right palm off the counter. Then I pressed my right hand flat against the wood, found the worn groove that was mine now, held it. I opened my eyes, looked at the coin slot, not at the glass, not at the road. 3 copper, I said. 1 passage. The voice stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Clean. Like a switch. The silence it left had weight. I sat in it until 4 a.m. The road pulled back. The desert came in, cold and gray, the horizon starting to lighten. Augustine came at dawn. He counted the coins, locked the box, passed the bag. Before he stepped back, I said, I heard Daniel's voice, tonight, from the road, right before 4 a.m. He stopped moving. He looked at me through the glass for a moment, a beat longer than usual. We all do, he said. He nodded once. He walked back to his truck. I sat in the booth until the sun was fully up. I thought about Daniel walking a road without an end. I thought about the voice the conductor had been saving for the right night, patient, knowing. I thought about the door handle under my palm and how close the gap had been. I drove home. The jacket was on the chair. I walked past it, made coffee, stood at the window for a while. Then I went back and sat in the chair I never sat in, across from the jacket. I leaned close enough to catch the faint cedar smell still in it, the desert dust still in the stitching. I sat there for a long time. Passengers walk. They don't call. If Daniel was walking, he was still there. I got up and made a second coffee and thought about the next shift. I asked Maria about Daniel the night after I heard his voice. Not right away. I drove home, slept a few hours, sat in Daniel's chair for a while. Then I drove back the next evening and arrived early, sat in the dark booth, waited. When the slow stretch hit around 1 in the morning, I looked at the condensation on the inside of the glass and waited for her reflection to form. She appeared. Gray hair, patient face, the same work uniform. Tell me what happened to Daniel, I said. Not a request, a statement the way I used to open a report. Her reflection was quiet for a moment, then, he was driving at night on 191. He saw the road for him. He was curious. He pulled over and walked toward the booth. Augustine was working. Yes, Daniel got close enough to look through the glass. He looked at a passenger. You know what looking does. Rule 2. Their emptiness will fill with you, and they will carry you onto the road. Then he spoke to it, I said. He said something. It doesn't matter what. The moment he spoke, he marked himself as a traveler. The conductor came. Daniel ran. But you cannot outrun the road once it has marked you. It follows. He made it to his car. He made his call to you. But the road had already found him. I thought about the recording, his voice getting more careful, and then the call cutting out mid-word. His face is smooth now, I said. Yes, he walks with the others. He doesn't remember his name. A passenger approached. The air pressure shifted. I'd learned to feel that before I heard anything. I extended my left hand. The coin dropped. Cold, vibration, carved spiral. Drop, stamp, reset. 3 copper, 1 passage. The passenger moved on. When I looked back at the glass, her reflection was still there. Is there a way to get him back? I asked. She didn't answer that night. The passengers changed in the week after that. It started with the timing. They paused a beat longer at the window, an extra half second before moving on. Subtle enough that I nearly missed it the first night. I adjusted my count, held the 3 seconds harder, and the rhythm held, but the pausing didn't stop. Then one night, a passenger pressed its palm flat against the main pane of the glass. Not the coin slot. The window itself, at head height from where I sat. It held it there for a full second, the gray flat hand, every finger defined. Then it moved on. The handprint stayed, clear in the condensation. I worked the rest of the shift with it 6 inches from my face. I didn't touch it. By 4 a.m. the road had gone, and the print was still there. Augustine saw it at dawn. He looked at it when he came to the window, said nothing, counted the coins, and walked back to his truck. After that, the passengers began angling slightly toward the window as they passed. A collective lean I couldn't measure in any single one, but felt in the aggregate. They were paying attention to me in a way they hadn't before, and every night the tall shape in the long coat was at the back of the line, still watching. Closer each night, or seeming closer, the way a shadow seems longer the further the sun drops. Augustine came to the booth before a shift during what I'd put at week 9. He knocked on the door and I opened it. He was holding a small iron key. He held it out. Under the counter, in the lockbox, a revolver, 1 silver bullet. I took the key. What's it for? If the conductor gets inside the booth, you have 30 seconds before it takes you. The bullet won't kill it. It'll slow it down enough to run. Has anyone ever used it? He held up his left hand, 3 fingers and 2 smooth-heeled stumps. He let me look for a moment. Then he lowered it and walked back to his truck without another word. I went inside and unlocked the lockbox. The revolver was there on a folded cloth. I checked it the way I'd been trained. Cylinder, barrel, trigger, 1 round in the chamber. I locked it back up and kept the iron key in my jacket pocket for the rest of the shift and every shift after. I didn't sleep well for several nights. Week 10. The procession was thin, longer gaps between passengers than usual. The thin nights were the ones to watch. On flood nights, the danger was in the rhythm slipping. On thin nights, the road had room to do other things. The conductor appeared at the back of the empty road around 2 in the morning, closer than it had ever been. Not at the vanishing point, closer to the middle of the visible stretch. And it moved differently this time, not still and watching. Moving, but wrong, broken, like frames had been cut from a film. One moment at the midpoint of the road, then I looked at the coin slot for a second, and when I looked back, it was much closer, and I hadn't seen it cross the distance. The passengers parted around it, moving aside without acknowledging it, the way a current moves around a stone. It came through them. Then it was at the front of the line. My left hand drifted toward the lockbox, and I stopped it, put it back on the coin tray. Maria's reflection appeared in the glass. Not yet, wait. The last passenger in the stretch cleared the window. The road was empty. The conductor stood 10 feet out, coat hanging still in the windless air. I was looking at the coin slot. My hands were in position. I could feel it at the window, the way you feel someone standing very close behind you. Then it was there, its face pressed to the glass. Frost spread from the center point, slow and even. The face it wore was Daniel's, young, the way he looked in his graduation photo, 2 years before he disappeared. The eyes were wrong, right shape, close to the right color, but the depth behind them was gone, like a photograph of eyes rather than eyes themselves. "Eli," it said, with his voice. "Open the door. I'm right here. I've been waiting." My right hand came off the counter. I felt it happen. The absence of the worn wood under my palm. And I didn't stop it because for a second I was back in my apartment at 2 in the morning listening to the recording, and the voice at the window sounded exactly the same as the voice in the recording, and the part of my mind that had been carrying his jacket and his case file for 3 months didn't process it as a trick. I looked at the face, directly. The first time I'd looked at anything on the road head-on since the first night. It said, "I missed you. Just open the door." I pressed both palms flat on the counter. "You are not my brother," I said. The first non-toll words I'd spoken in the booth in weeks. They came out quiet and flat, the same tone I used to use on bad traffic stops. Not loud, not shaking, just clear. The face rippled. Underneath the features, something adjusted. The way a mask shifts when the person wearing it changes expression. Daniel's features blurred at the edges, and for a half-second I saw what was actually there. The layered suggestion of 1,000 different faces, none of them fully formed, assembled and reassembled over a very long time. Then Daniel's face came back, sharper, trying again. The glass cracked. A spiderweb fracture spread from the frost point where its forehead pressed, thin white lines running to the edges of the pane. "You are not my brother," I said again. I heard a truck door behind the conductor, then boots on the asphalt. Actual footsteps. A living person's weight on a surface. I heard it in my peripheral vision. Augustine, standing on the road outside the booth. He was holding a bone coin in his left hand, larger than any coin I'd seen in the tray, the size of a silver dollar, maybe larger, carved with symbols I didn't recognize, nothing like the standard spiral. He held it in his 3 fingers at waist height. "Augustine," I said through the cracked glass. He didn't look at me. He looked at the conductor. "You wanted a conductor," he said, flat, the way he said everything. "Take me. I've been here long enough." The conductor turned toward him. The movement was the same broken frame thing, facing the glass and then facing Augustine in 2 positions with nothing in between. Its face shifted as it turned. When it was fully toward him, it wore a woman's face. Not Daniel's, not anyone I knew. A woman maybe Augustine's age, dark hair, the same wrong depth in the eyes. Augustine looked at that face and didn't look away. He took a step forward. My hand was on the door handle. I don't know when I'd reached for it. "Don't, Maria," from inside my skull, harder than she'd ever been. "If you open that door, the road takes you. He knows what he is doing. He has known for a long time." Augustine stepped forward again. The conductor came toward him in those skipped frame movements, and Augustine didn't step back. His hand with the large coin rose slowly. The conductor closed around him. There was no sound, no impact. It was like a coat being draped over someone, except the coat kept its shape and the person inside became part of the shape. Then the coat settled, and Augustine was standing where he'd been. Except he wasn't Augustine anymore. His face was smooth, flat gray even, every line and crease he'd worn for 60-odd years gone, planed away to nothing. His eyes had the wrong depth. He turned, and his turning was silent. No footsteps, no weight on the asphalt, and he joined the procession. He walked east with the others, toward the vanishing point, toward whatever was at the far end of the road that I'd never seen. The conductor followed. The procession thinned. The road went quiet. I stood with both palms flat on the counter and watched the last of them until they were small shapes near the vanishing point, and then nothing. 4 a.m. came. The road withdrew, slow and even, the wrong dark ground showing beneath it, and then the normal desert coming back, cold and pre-dawn. The cracked glass held its fracture pattern. The frost the conductor had left ran down the pane in small lines as it melted. No truck came at dawn. No one came to the window. I counted the coins in the tray myself, locked them back in the box, and sat in the booth until the sun was fully up. I looked at my own reflection in the cracked glass for a long time. Fractured into pieces, each piece showing a slightly different angle of my face. I unlocked the box and looked at the revolver. 1 silver bullet. I locked it again and put the key back in my pocket. I drove home with the coin tray in the passenger seat because there was no one to take it from me. I set it on the kitchen counter and sat in the chair, Daniel's chair, the one I'd started sitting in, and looked at his jacket. He was on the road. He'd been on it from the night he pulled over out of curiosity and broke 2 rules in a row, and his face was smooth now, and he walked without sound, and he didn't remember his name. The road had a booth. The booth had a door. The door opened from the inside. I had been opening it and closing it every midnight for weeks now, and I knew how it worked, and I knew what was on the other side of it. I looked at the jacket for a long time. Then I found a piece of paper and a pen and started writing. I finished the letter before sunrise. It took 3 drafts. The first 2 read like reports: date, location, sequence of events. Too much cop left in me. The third I wrote like I was talking across the kitchen table, the way we used to sit on Sunday mornings when Daniel was still small enough to sleep until noon. I told her about the call and the booth and the road and what the road had done to Daniel the night he pulled over out of curiosity and looked at something he shouldn't have looked at. I told her I was going to get him back. I sealed the envelope and wrote Augustine's P.O. box address on the front, the only address I had that anyone would eventually open. I set it on the counter beside the coin tray. Then I sat in Daniel's chair and looked at his jacket for a while. The cedar smell was mostly gone. What was left was just denim and desert dust and the faint ozone I'd started carrying home from the booth on my own clothes. I drove to the booth at sunset. Maria's reflection was already in the glass when I sat down. Not in condensation, the night was dry, but in the glass itself, in the dark reflection behind the viewer, patient face, gray hair, uniform. "Tell me how to walk the road and come back," I said. "There is a way. Offer yourself to the conductor. In exchange, it will release Daniel. He will return to you. He will breathe. His heart will beat. But the road will have taken everything else. He will be hollow. And me. The road will leave marks. You will not be taken, not if the conductor agrees. But you will not be fully separate from it. Not anymore." "Did your husband come back?" "My husband walked through as a passenger. He paid his coin. He moved on. I watched him from inside the booth. I chose to stay after that. That is different from what you are asking." "Okay," I said. I ran the motion in the dark until midnight. Left hand out, coin in palm, drop, stamp, reset. At midnight, I closed my eyes, counted 60, heard the road form, the heavy unrolling sound, the pressure change popping my ears. When I opened my eyes, the asphalt stretched east, black and wet. I worked the shift. I needed to be on the road at the right moment, not at midnight when the procession was thick. So I worked the rhythm, 3 seconds per passenger, right palm flat, left hand in its loop, the toll spoken in the same flat monotone. Around 2 a.m., the procession thinned. Maria's reflection appeared. "Now, while the road is quiet, walk toward the front." I pressed my right palm flat one last time. I felt the worn groove in the wood that was mine, the smooth spot my hand had made over months of shifts, sitting beside older grooves left by hands that had come before mine. Then I opened the booth door. The asphalt was warm under my boots and softer than it looked, giving slightly with each step the way old linoleum gives. The passengers nearest me slowed, their knot faces turning toward me. I looked straight ahead toward the vanishing point and walked. The road stretched further than it looked from inside the booth. The vanishing point stayed ahead of me as I walked, always the same distance out, and I understood the road was as long as it needed to be. I walked for a long time. My legs ached the way they ached on long patrol shifts. The cold came in from the dark on either side, a dark that had mass to it, a thickness. Things moved in it. I didn't look at them. The passengers walked in complete silence around me. I was the only thing on the road that made sound. My boots, my breath, the small shift of my jacket. The sound felt too loud out here, like talking in an empty church. I found the conductor at the front. The procession had spread thin ahead of me, and eventually I was walking open road. The conductor stood where the road should have vanished into dark. It wore Augustine's face, younger than the man I knew, the way he might have looked before the road had worked on him. Strong face, dark hair, not yet gray. "You came," it said in Augustine's hollow voice. "I knew you would." "Take me to Daniel," I said. It turned and gestured at the procession behind me. Daniel was 20 feet back, walking with the others at the same steady pace, eyes fixed on the middle distance. Same clothes from the night he disappeared. Jeans, hoodie, the denim jacket that was the twin of the one in my apartment. His face was smooth, his eyes the same wrong depth as every other passenger's. He walked in the rhythm of the road without knowing or caring. I went to him. I put my hand on his arm and he stopped, mid-stride, the way a machine stops when the power cuts. I stood in front of him and looked at his face. Still his face underneath, the structure of it, the shape I'd grown up alongside. Just sealed over, smoothed down to nothing. "Daniel," I said. Nothing. His eyes went straight through me. I took his hand. His fingers were the deep cold of something left outside for a very long time, and when we touched, the cold water shock ran up my arm. The same jolt I'd felt from bone coins in the tray. His fingers curled around my hand. Not a grip, just contact. The conductor spoke behind me. He chose this. He was tired. He was frightened. The road offered peace, and he accepted. You cannot undo acceptance. I turned. He made 2 mistakes in 5 minutes while scared and alone in the dark. That is not the same as choosing. You know the difference. "All of them made mistakes," it said. "Give me the one who is mine." I waited. We had an agreement. The booth, the coins, the rules, your checkpoint, your road, your terms. The operator follows the rules and the road holds its end. I followed every rule for months. My right hand never left the counter. I never looked at a face. I never answered a voice I recognized. I paused. I held the rhythm when hundreds of passengers were pressing the glass. I held it when I heard my brother's voice. I held it when your face was 6 inches from mine. I earned something. I'm calling it in. The road pulled at me. It started in my feet, a low vibration in the warm asphalt, climbing upward, and with it a heaviness behind my eyes, a pull toward stillness. I understood what was happening. The same thing that had happened to Daniel. I tightened my grip on his hand. The conductor stood still for a long moment. The pull in my legs grew stronger. Then it stepped aside. No words, no gesture. It simply moved out of the path between me and the booth, and the passengers around us flowed into the space it had vacated. That was the answer. I turned toward the booth. The yellow light was visible at the far end of the road, small and distant. I pulled Daniel's hand and he came with me, his feet finding the asphalt without resistance, following the pull of my grip. He walked when I walked. He stopped when I stopped. I looked at the light and I walked toward it. The road held me the whole way back. The warmth in the asphalt trying to slow my steps, the weight behind my eyes, the procession pressing in from the sides, bodies from every decade of history walking silently around us. I didn't look at any of them. I looked at the yellow light. The booth door was still open. I pulled Daniel through and pulled the door shut behind us and locked it. The road pressed against the glass, the whole weight of everything out there bearing against the booth. The cracked glass from week 10 flexed slightly in its frame. I sat on the stool with Daniel standing beside me and pressed my right palm flat on the counter and waited. 4 a.m. came. The pressure against the glass released slowly. The road began to pull back the same way it always pulled back, the asphalt curling east, taking everything with it. The procession receded. The conductor was last. It stood at the edge of the retreating asphalt, Augustine's borrowed face watching me through the cracked glass, as the last of the road pulled away from beneath it. "You will come back," it said. "They always come back." Then it was gone. The desert came back. Cold, pre-dawn, real, actual wind, actual sand, the clock ticking too slow on the wall. Daniel was standing beside the stool with his hand still in mine. I drove home with him in the passenger seat. He breathed. I could hear it in the quiet cab. Slow, even, present. But his eyes were fixed on the middle distance, and he didn't answer when I said his name, and he didn't turn his head when I made turns. I settled him in the apartment. I sat him in the chair I used to sit in before I started using his. I made coffee and put a cup near his hand, not because he would drink it, but because the apartment needed to feel like someone lived in it. I talked to him about the drive, about the weather, about small things. He didn't answer. After dark, I noticed his palm was flat against the window glass, watching the empty lot outside. The same pressure the passengers used against the booth window. He was looking for the road. I put his jacket over his shoulders because I couldn't tell if he felt the cold. Then I went to the bathroom and looked at my own face in the mirror. Same lines, same tiredness. But at the edges, the jaw, the corners of my eyes, something new. A smoothness that hadn't been there before. Not Daniel's smoothness. The beginning of something. The road had marked me, and the mark was going to stay. I went back and sat across from Daniel, and we spent the rest of the night like that. Weeks passed. I took care of him, and he breathed, and his heart beat, and he was there in every way except the ones that mattered. I fed him, moved him, talked to him. Sometimes at night his hand pressed the glass, and I sat with him and we looked at the dark together. The smoothness at the edges of my face grew more visible as the weeks went on. The road was still in me. I'd brought some of it back the same way you bring sand home in your shoes, except this kind didn't shake out. I thought about Augustine running the booth for 27 years, how long that took to work through a person. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning, unknown number. A young voice, slightly uncertain, reading from something. "Mile marker 47, County Road 8N, midnight. 5,000 cash." I looked at Daniel. He was standing at the window with his palm on the glass, watching the empty lot where no road was running in the middle of the day. I knew what the road was. I knew what the rules cost and what they kept at bay. I knew what was at the vanishing point and how to hold the rhythm against it. The new operator would last 2 nights without someone showing them how. I picked up the phone. "I'll be there," I said. Midnight. I stood in the booth with the laminated card taped beside my head. Behind the booth, my truck sat in the dark. Daniel was in the passenger seat, buckled in, hands in his lap. His palm would be pressed against the passenger window by now, watching. The road formed at midnight the same as it always had. Heavy sound, pressure change. I closed my eyes, counted 60, opened them. The asphalt stretched east, and 10 feet from the window a passenger was waiting. I extended my left hand. The coin dropped. Cold, vibration, carved spiral. I took it and stamped and reset. 3 copper, 1 passage. The passenger glided past. 3 seconds. The next was already at the window. I kept my right palm flat on the counter, the wood worn smooth by my hand now, my groove sitting alongside the older ones. Augustine's, and before his, whoever had been here before Augustine, all the way back to the beginning of the booth in 1923. My left hand moved in its loop, out, take, drop, stamp, reset. The next was already at the window.